Chapter 87. Wu Ming and Karna stood in the middle of the battlefield, where the ground could no longer be seen. The two looked at each other. "Even Brahmastra Kundala couldn't take you down," Karna said calmly. "I didn't hear the surprise in that sentence," Wu Ming said with a smile. Karna just shook his head and said, "You can block my Brahmastra Kundala, which means you are indeed the legendary British Silver Dragon Villo." Then he said, "It seems that Sadric, the General of Salvation of France, is not you. No, it's your other identity, Villo." Wu Ming obviously noticed that Karna had a special skill, and he already knew that he was both Sadric and a Villo. Poor man's insight, the ability to see through the other party's character and attribute, and not be deceived by verbal excuses and deceit. "I once had the honor to ask the weak about their life and value, so I have the ability to see through the other party's character and attribute," Karna explained. "You are not an evil person. In that case, the rumor that the Villo who transformed into the demonic dragon possessed Sadric is a rumor. No, it should be said that the Villo and Sadric are the same person, so the rumor is also correct." Wu Ming couldn't help but praise, as expected of Karna, the hero of charity. "Yes, I am both Sadric and a Villo, but I am now summoned as Sadric, so I only have Sadric skills and noble phantoms." Karna said, "Then, in order to show my respect, I will give you my strongest attack." After that, Karna's body began to ignite in flames. Upon closer inspection, the thin and sturdy golden armor on his body began to turn into flames. The flames gathered at the tip of the divine spear transformed from the Brahmastra. "Is that so? Then I can't hide it anymore." As he spoke, Wu Ming also raised his silver night sword. "Comprehend the mercy of the King of Gods." Karna raised his spear, and the air around him began to heat up. "Indra, watch carefully." The armor completely peeled off his body and turned into flames. The damaged ground around him began to melt. "Extermination, this stab." The flames wrapped around the tip of the spear, forming a huge lightning spear. At this point, this place was already a sea of flames. "Burn completely." A huge sun wheel shone behind him. "Vasvi Shakti, O sun, submit to death." The stars hidden in the world. Meteor Silver's blade began to emit a white light, illuminating everything around it. A sacred sword that can wipe out all evil. Cracks appeared on the body of the sword, and an even more dazzling golden light burst forth from within. "There's no need to cover your light anymore." The body of the sword was completely shattered, and a dazzling golden sword of light appeared. It was constantly floating, and the silver sword fragments were attached to the golden sword of light. "Shine." The sword of light soared into the sky. Silver meteor. The unparalleled lightning collided with the dazzling starlight. The space somewhere in the sky garden gradually cracked. Sharon and Achilles were in an independent small world. Atlanta and Astolfo, Sieg, Frankenstein, and Cowles were in the residential area of the Sky Garden. Semiramis and Mordred between the thrones, and Gielli, the lion, outside the door. Joan of Arc in the environment, and Shakespeare, who was playing the role of evil. Shiro Amakusa, who was about to walk out of the Great Holy Grail. These people all saw the scene and heard the sound of the world's destruction. Boom, 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 boom. The cracked space directly exploded, and a huge amount of energy violently poured onto the Sky Garden. A large amount of light seemed to have turned into a substance, raging and destroying everything in the Sky Garden. Whether it was Achilles and Sharon, who came out of the one-on-one space after removing the star of soaring skies Diatrico Aster Long. Atlanta, who realized the crisis and fled quickly, and Astolfo, Sieg, Frankenstein, and Cowles, who were carried by the eagle. They were all desperately running in the opposite direction of the light. To be precise, they were fleeing. Almost everyone used skills or noble phantoms. Achilles used his noble phantoms, which allowed him to pass through the vast battlefield in one breath. Even if there were obstacles in the field, his speed would not be reduced. Sharon used his skill, Divine Wisdom A+, to simulate his own skill as a centaur, 1,000-mile scamper. Divine Wisdom A+, except for the hero's unique skills, almost all skills, limited to ancient Greece, can be played with BA-level proficiency. 1,000-mile scamper A has endless stamina for long-distance movement, and the agility parameter temporarily increases rapidly. It can also play the effect of increasing the endurance and strength parameter when running at full speed. Atlanta used her skill, Crossing Arcadia. Crossing Arcadia B can move across all obstacles in the field, including the enemy. Because on the edge of crisis, Atlanta did not use another skill, Aesthetics of Pursuit. Aesthetics of Pursuit C. Let the enemy take the lead, and then you can take the lead after confirming the enemy's actions. Although the enemy ran first and she would overtake the enemy first, Atlanta did not dare to use this skill when the light behind her was spreading rapidly. If she did not run fast enough, it would be bad if the light caught up with her. Astolfo, on the other hand, let the eagle carry the four of them and used Hippogriff's trump card, Dimensional Jump. Dimension Jump. After releasing the true name, the eagle and its rider will switch into a blurry posture and disappear when the eagle screeches. It can escape all forms of observation in the world, and even reappear in other places. This ability could be called a bug-level ability, saving the lives of the four of them. No one knew how long it took, the light disappeared, and the original huge sky garden disappeared directly. The Great Holy Grail, which was originally in the center of the Sky Garden, was also exposed. Next to the Great Holy Grail was Joan of Arc and Shakespeare, who came out of the environment. The hall in the center of the throne was also exposed, revealing Semiramis, Mordred, who was covered in blood, and Gieli, whose body was pierced in many places. Everyone, whether they were servants or masters, looked at the huge sky fortress that was missing half with a trembling mind. Even Fiori and Gold in the distant Mylnia fortress noticed the magical anomaly of the Sky Garden. Semiramis had a special skill of double summoning, and she also had a caster class. As the noble phantoms of Semiramis' magic workshop, Hanging Garden of Babylon, evolved from the beliefs of many mistaken believers, so it was named Vanity. Because of that, the conditions to activate this noble phantoms were quite harsh. Not only did it require the wood, stone, minerals, plants, water, and other materials from the ruins near Iraq's capital, Baghra, where Semiramis lived, but it also required 3 days and 3 nights of non-stop chanting to complete it. It was really 3 days and 3 nights, that is, 72 hours. And now, this magnificent building was about to disappear once again. Chapter 88. Before that, Joan of Arc, who arrived at the Great Holy Grail earlier than anyone else, encountered the biggest irony in history. "Oh, Joan of Arc, welcome to my stage," exclaimed Shakespeare in a strange whisper from Joan of Arc's environment. Joan of Arc looked at the changing scene around her and frowned. "This is my hometown, Domremy." Joan of Arc looked at her clothes that had changed into a village girl's style, and looked at the small village, not far away. "Jean?" A gentle female voice came. Joan of Arc turned to look at the source of the voice. "Mother!" Joan of Arc was a little surprised. She didn't expect this environment to be so realistic. Why are you called a witch and burned to death?" "Why, Jean." Joan of Arc's mother cried and crawled on the ground, her hands holding Joan of Arc tightly. "Come back to the village with me, Jean, don't worry about other people anymore," Joan of Arc's mother pleaded. But Joan of Arc didn't pay attention to her mother, not because Joan of Arc was unfilial, but because the environment in front of her was just created by Red Caster Shakespeare. "Red Team's caster, are you satisfied with this?" Jean said calmly. Then Shakespeare's voice sounded in the air. "No, the drama has just begun. Let's begin the second act." When Shakespeare's voice fell, Joan of Arc found that there were 2 curtains in front of her, like the curtain on the opening and the closing stage. One opened. When the curtain opened, the scene in front of Joan of Arc changed again. Joan of Arc stood on a high ground, holding the holy flag in her hand, commanding the French soldiers behind her to rush to the British enemy. For a time, the entire battlefield was covered with blood, and a lot of lives were constantly lost. Some people begged for mercy, but they were still killed. In an instant, Joan of Arc was full of dead bodies. "It's covered with blood, Your Highness Saintess." Shakespeare's voice sounded in the air. However, Joan of Arc didn't have much of a reaction to this. "It's useless to show me anything." Joan of Arc then raised her hand and looked at it. "Since the hands of those who follow me are dirty, then my hands are dirty, and I have never felt fear of this." Suddenly, as if a corpse had come back to life, a gorgeously dressed corpse suddenly sat up, but that face was Shakespeare's. He looked at Joan of Arc and asked, "Then, let me ask you as the representative of Charles VII." Then a corpse beside Joan of Arc suddenly raised its head. Needless to say, it was another Shakespeare's face. "You stepped forward bravely and went to the battlefield. Dirty my hands with blood and win back France." Then the corpses around her raised their heads and asked Joan of Arc, "However, you were burned at the stake in the end. How sad is this? In my opinion, this is betrayal, tragedy, despair. Even so, do you still believe in the Lord? Do you still think that fighting is meaningful?" However, Jean still turned a blind eye to these and replied calmly, "Of course. My death is a fate that I have never escaped." Then Joan of Arc raised the holy flag in her hand and said, "Since I raised this flag, I have lost the right to die peacefully in my hometown." For Joan of Arc, who was not affected in the slightest, Shakespeare was not disappointed. One of the corpses snapped his fingers, and the scene changed. Joan of Arc looked at herself in a prisoner's uniform, her hands were handcuffed, and the handcuffs were connected to this rope. She was led forward by a knight riding a horse in front of her. In this way, how could Joan of Arc not know where she was now? What a bad taste, Castor! Joan of Arc said sarcastically to Shakespeare. "No, no, no, this time it's not you, Lady Saint." The knight riding the horse in front turned back and looked at Joan of Arc. Sure enough, it was another Shakespeare's face. Shakespeare pointed to the front, and Joan of Arc looked in the direction he pointed. Joan of Arc's pupils shrank slightly. Sauterlec. Yes, it was Joan of Arc's childhood friend, General Sauterlec, or Wu Ming, who was burned at the stake in this illusion. Wu Ming's eyes were lifeless as he was tied to a pillar by iron chains. The flames around his body were burning fiercely. Joan of Arc hurriedly ran over, but when she was still a certain distance away from Wu Ming, she was pulled by the rope in her hand. Why didn't you burn me?" Joan of Arc hurriedly asked a priest standing under the execution platform. The priest looked back at Joan of Arc with Shakespeare's face, took out his noble phantasm, and replied to Joan of Arc, "The fantasy constructed by my noble phantasm is your memory, that is to say, the death of General Sauterlec is your idea, Saint Joan of Arc." Shakespeare's last words hit Joan of Arc's heart, and she began to panic. No, no, how could it be? Joan of Arc couldn't help but think of the scene where Sauterlec rushed to her with wounds all over his body and was burned to death with her. "Is it really me?" And Shakespeare said like a kidnapper, "Yes, yes, it's all your fault." At this moment, an incomparably terrifying magical power came this way in Shakespeare's perception. Because this magical power was so terrifying that even Joan of Arc, who was in the illusion, noticed it. The illusion where Joan of Arc was shattered like a mirror, and it instantly shattered. What? My noble phantasm is actually... Outside, Shakespeare and Joan of Arc still stood in place. However, on the other side of the hall, the originally gorgeous hall suddenly lost a piece, revealing a vast sky. "This magical power is Sauterlec," Joan of Arc said. At this moment, Joan of Arc, who had escaped from the illusion created by Shakespeare's noble phantasm, "The hour of the play has arrived, and here shall be thunderous applause. would no longer be deceived by Shakespeare's rhetoric. In comparison, at this moment, Shakespeare had lost his noble phantasm. Subsequently, the floating fortress, hanging garden of Babylon, which had lost half of its power, had completely lost its ability to float. Although the central area had been slightly damaged, this little bit would not be of any help to the Sky Garden, which had lost half of its floating ability. The reason why the floating garden could float was because of the inverted magic inside. Whether it was water or plants, they would flow and grow in the opposite direction. The water would flow from top to bottom, and the plants would stay from bottom to top. At this moment, in the central area with the Great Holy Grail, a large amount of water began to fly to the sky. After leaving the magic range of the floating garden, it fell to the ground. Not only the water, but a large number of broken buildings began to fall to the ground. The remaining half of the floating garden was also on the verge of collapse, slowly falling to the ground. It was getting faster and faster until it fell to the forest below, making a sound like an earthquake. A large amount of smoke and dust rose to the sky, and it lasted for a long time. Chapter 89. Amidst the ruins of a large number of buildings, a hand suddenly reached out from one of the taller ruins. Accompanied by a burst of debris and dirt, Wu-Ming struggled to crawl out. Wu-Ming was covered in wounds, and his broken armor was almost completely gone. Wu-Ming panted heavily and looked ahead tiredly. He saw another hand reaching out from the taller ruins. However, compared to Wu-Ming who struggled to climb out, this figure was more illusory and weak. After getting out of the ruins, he half squatted on the ground. Karna could no longer stand. After all, compared to Wu-Ming who did not sacrifice any defense, Karna had stripped off the armor that was connected to his skin to form Karna's most powerful noble artifact, Sun Wheel, Obedient Death, Vasvi Shakti. In the Hindu mythological narrative, Mahabharata, Karna was willing to strip off his armor and give it to the Thunder Emperor Indra because he knew that he had been tricked. Indra was moved and gave Karna a divine spear that could kill everything with one hit. The noble artifact that evolved from it became Karna's strongest defense and received a certain degree of damage to obtain his most powerful attack. However, because his body was already damaged and had no defense, under the aftermath of the collision between Sun Wheel, Obedient Death, Vasvi Shakti, and Meteor Silver Meteor, Karna's injuries were more serious than Wu-Ming's. Even his spirit core was slightly cracked. Cough. As expected of the legendary knight Vilo, Serene. What a beautiful attack! Cough cough cough. Karna said to Wu-Ming with a weak smile. It was obvious that Karna was having a good time even though he was in a terrible state. Wu-Ming also smiled happily and said, "You don't have to flatter me, Karna. If it weren't for the fact that the virtual space we were in prevented the explosion from spreading, you wouldn't have been so badly injured." Wu-Ming was right. Because the virtual space was comparable to an inherent barrier, the aftermath of Wu-Ming and Karna's noble artifacts did not cause it to explode. As a result, the aftermath of the explosion caused secondary damage to Wu-Ming and Karna, which was why they were in such a sorry state. It was like comparing the damage caused by a bomb exploding in a narrow room with the damage caused by an explosion in an open space. Wu-Ming was not so bad. Although he was not in his true form, he still had the protection of his incomplete dragon scales, so his spirit core was not damaged. However, he was still injured. Cough cough. I've heard of the Star Holy Sword Silver. Now that I've seen it, its power is indeed extraordinary. In the face of Karna's praise, Wu-Ming felt a little helpless and blushed inwardly. After all, Wu-Ming did not have this noble artifact in the first place. Wu-Ming, who was in the real world of Wu-Ming, did not have this noble artifact. Even Wu-Ming, who was in the real world of Vilo, did not have this noble artifact. This noble artifact evolved from one of Wu-Ming's skills with the help of suppression. Miracle, legendary? Dragon, legendary? Miracle, legendary? Before Wu-Ming faced Karna's strongest attack, He had the belief that he had to win, which led to the activation of this skill. In addition, the suppression of the world where Wu Ming was in had a special relationship with Wu Ming, so to a certain extent it supported Wu Ming, allowing him to obtain an evolved noble artifact. Silver Meteor, Silver Meteor, level, EX type, evil noble artifact distance, maximum catch. This was a treasure created by the suppression of the planet. The sacred star sword, which had been released from its suppression, had the effect of judging the enemy as evil. As long as the enemy was the owner's enemy or someone who had to be defeated, the sacred star sword would give the enemy the attribute of evil. The target of the judgment was both a person and an object. Even concepts such as space and time could be included in the judgment. Because the noble artifact was a part of himself, Wu Ming immediately used it after obtaining it. He was not unfamiliar with it at all. The suppression knew that Wu Ming, who was in the real world of Wu Ming, would not be able to defeat Karna, so it forcibly added a noble artifact to Wu Ming by relying on Wu Ming's wait for me skill. Miracle. After all, the character of Sodlek was created by the suppression of history. Adding a noble artifact at the last minute was not a big deal to the suppression. If Wu Ming, who was in the real world of Vilo, had been able to tie with Karna, he would have had a mysterious buff. However, as a Sodlek, Wu Ming did not have many mysteries, so he really could not fight against the powerful and mysterious Karna. As the origin dragon, Soren was someone whom the two suppression forces had to curry favor with, so he had to be a good host in his own world. It was precisely because of this that Wu Ming could be considered to have defeated Karna. It was also because of this that Wu Ming blushed. Although the suppression had good intentions, Wu Ming was not someone who could not accept defeat. Wu Ming was not that thick-skinned to be praised by the enemy for defeating him with a power that did not belong to him. However, he could not say that. After all, Silver was Wu Ming's noble artifact, and Silver Meteor was an evolved noble artifact that was forcibly catalyzed by the planet's suppression force and the human's suppression force. Even without the suppression force's interference, Wu Ming's Silver could still evolve into Silver Meteor or an evolved noble artifact that was as powerful as Silver Meteor. This was also the reason why Wu Ming did not hesitate to use Silver Meteor. It would be his sooner or later, so it did not matter if it was earlier or later. After all, Wu Ming was not a heroic spirit that could not grow. Wu Ming himself could grow, including a part of his noble artifact. Karna could also see that Wu Ming was a little embarrassed. Although he did not know why, he immediately changed the topic. "Can you grant me a request, Your Excellency Sirenthod?" Karna no longer called Wu Ming Sodrik. After all, the power that defeated him was from the Vilo. "Please speak." Wu Ming looked at Karna, who was about to disappear, and nodded. Even if Karna asked, Wu Ming would find a way to help Karna. After all, this was not a glorious victory. The original master of the Red Team was caught by assassin with poison. Although the Sky Garden was destroyed and fell, the room where my original master and the others were in was on the other side of the undestroyed Sky Garden. Even if the Sky Garden fell, I don't know if they are okay. Please go there and help me check the situation. If possible, please save them. Wu Ming was stunned, but he immediately reacted. Then Wu Ming smiled. As expected of Karna, the hero of charity. "I'll go now." Wu Ming dragged his broken body to the direction Karna pointed out. Karna, who stayed in place, turned into light and disappeared after his spirit core was completely shattered. Chapter 90. Wu Ming took out many bottles of healing potion on the way, and after drinking all of them, his body almost recovered. Wu Ming moved his body, and now, except for the serious injuries on his body, there was no big problem. Because Wu Ming had the skill Magic Dragon EX, his mana was not damaged much. Wu Ming came to the place where Karna pointed, and everywhere he looked, there was a ruin. The entire Sky Garden fell to the ground and was almost completely shattered. Wuming released his mana and began to search for the masters who were controlled by Semiramis' poison. Those masters before the Red Servant were not ordinary people, but one of the best magicians. Therefore, when Wuming arrived, those magicians still had signs of life that even Wuming almost didn't notice. When Wuming dug them out, their bodies were already badly mutilated. Wuming quickly took out 5 bottles of healing potion and gave them to each of them to drink. Yggdrasil was a game that transcended its time. Its degree of freedom was so high that it was unbelievable. But in this game, there was only one kind of item, and that was the health potion called Health Potion. There were no other medicinal items such as Mana Potion, Detoxification Potion, and so on, so they could only rely on other rare items. Because of that, as the only health potion in the game, its performance was naturally needless to say. If it was placed in a noble artifact, it could be judged as a C-level item. Although Wuming once gave Astolfo the health potion very easily, it was not a small amount. When he first treated the androids, Wuming ordered everyone to take 1/3 of the health potion. That was to prevent the androids, who acted as a mana supply battery, from being infected by the bacteria in the air as soon as they came out of the incubator. Sieg was a good example. Because he left the incubator for too long, Astolfo said that before Astolfo took Sieg away, Black Archer Sharon gave Sieg a simple treatment. However, androids born as magic power batteries were different from androids born to fight. Because the androids, which were magic-powered batteries, did not need to move around in the outside world, their creators did not give them excellent physical fitness. It could be said that they would not survive without the nutrient solution in the incubator. This was the racial flaw of the androids that were born as prop. Although Sieg was saved by Wuming's potion at that time, Wuming did not have a way to solve his gene problem. After all, even if the game had a high degree of freedom, there were no items related to genes. The game was enjoyable, not a headache. Because of the transplanting of Siegfried's heart, Siegfried was strengthened by the dragon heart and eliminated the flaws of the android. As for whether the heart would disappear or not, since Sieg was connected to the heart, the magic circuits were naturally connected as well. Sieg's heart was supported by Sieg's magic power, so it naturally wouldn't disappear. Over time, his heart would definitely fuse with Sieg's. The androids, who were fighting forces, were not much better. After all, they were weapons that could be thrown away after being used, and they participated in the battle as cannon fodder. The androids that were rescued had their physical fitness temporarily improved by Wuming's potion at that time. It was mainly thanks to Gould, the creator, who adjusted their physical condition later on, that they could live like ordinary people. As for the 5 masters, Wuming was still afraid that they would die halfway, so he gave them a whole bottle of the potion. It must be noted that this was a potion that was comparable to a C-grade item. Seeing that the 5 masters had not woken up yet, Wuming remembered that Karna said that they were poisoned. Wuming immediately took out a short staff. This short staff could remove the poison status of any item below the divine artifact level. It was an item that could be used by injecting magic power into it. However, it had a limited number of uses. After the number of uses was used up, it would disappear. It was because Wuming was restricted by his class that Wuming took out this high-level item with restrictions. Moreover, Wuming speculated that the poison used by Semiramis was definitely not a high-level poison, otherwise these people would have died long ago. Detoxification. The short staff emitted a green light, enveloping the 5 unconscious people. After a few seconds, the short staff shattered and disappeared. Wuming looked at the short staff that disappeared in his hand and couldn't help but sigh, as expected of the poison used by Semiramis, the most ancient poisoner. It completely exhausted the short staff's number of uses. Although the level of this poison was not the highest, it still exhausted the detoxification short staff's number of uses. A few seconds later, the 5 people lying on the ground opened their eyes and sat up weakly. "This place is... I remember the Holy Grail War is over. What happened to us? Everyone was full of doubts. Then Wu Ming spoke. Magicians, I am a servant of this Holy Grail War. This Holy Grail War is not over yet. You have now lost the qualification to be its master. As for what happened, you can find out in the future. This place will soon become the battlefield of a great war. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he turned into a spirit and disappeared. These magicians looked at the place where Wu Ming disappeared. They could see that the person just now was not an ordinary person, and they chose to believe in Wu Ming. They immediately struggled to stand up and walked in the direction that Wu Ming just pointed. After Wu Ming gave advice to the group of magicians, he went to the place where the Great Holy Grail was. Fortunately, this was a forest. If it fell into the city, it would be troublesome. Wu Ming thought. When Wu Ming arrived at the Great Holy Grail, he saw two groups of people facing each other. The Great Holy Grail was revealed from the ruins. It was a ball with a huge female sculpture inside. In front of the Great Holy Grail, two groups of people stood in front of the Great Holy Grail. On one side, there was Red Assassin Semiramis, Red Rider Achilles, Red Archer Atlanta, Red Caster Shakespeare, and Ruler Shiro Amakusa, who hurriedly came out because of the fall of the Sky Garden. On the other side, there was Red Saber Mordred, Lion Jelly, who was the master of Wu Ming and Mordred, Black Archer Sharon, Black Rider Astolfo, and Astolfo's master Sieg, Black Berserker Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's master Cowls, and finally, Ruler Joan of Arc, the referee of the Holy Grail War. In addition to the masters, when the servants saw the arrival of Wu Ming, Amakusa's people's faces changed slightly, while Joan of Arc's people were happy. Although it seemed that Joan of Arc's side had more people, in terms of heroic spirit strength, they were still stronger than Shiro Amakusa's party. If they really fought, the black side might not necessarily have an advantage, but now with Wu Ming, the situation was completely reversed. Only Wu Ming rushed over, which meant that Karna was defeated. A servant who could defeat Karna was better than Amakusa's side. Looking at Wu Ming's seemingly unscathed appearance, Shiro Amakusa couldn't help but frown. I didn't expect you to win against Lancer. You're not Sodric, are you, Vilo, Knight of the Round Table? Shiro Amakusa said. After all, such a powerful holy sword of star, even based on Semiramis' description, Shiro Amakusa was sure that it was the noble phantasm of the Knights of the Round Table, Vilo. Wu Ming stood beside Joan of Arc, and his helmet began to disintegrate and attach to his shoulder. Then, Wu Ming looked at Joan of Arc and the others, who were in a sorry state but didn't suffer any injuries. Wu Ming first smiled at Joan of Arc, then looked at Shiro Amakusa. Then you've guessed wrong, Shiro Amakusa. I am indeed Sodric, but that's only because I'm also a Knight of the Round Table, Vero. This time, I'm only being summoned as Sodric. Chapter 91. Because Joan of Arc and the others had already been informed by Wu Ming, they weren't surprised. However, seeing that the people from Amakusa weren't surprised either, it seemed that they had already been informed by Shiro Amakusa. Achilles and Atlanta revealed an expression that said, "So that's really the case." Shakespeare, on the other hand, had a happy expression. Semiramis gritted her teeth. After all, her noble artifact had been destroyed by Wu Ming. Shiro Amakusa smiled faintly. I really didn't expect that you, whom I met once, would become a major force to obstruct me. In response, Wu Ming shook his head regretfully and said, Even without me, others would obstruct you. Then, do you want to come to my side, Knight of the Round Table, Silver Dragon Britain Vilo? Shiro Amakusa smiled. Everyone was shocked. After all, most people, no, almost everyone, didn't want a rope in the enemy during the final battle. Wu Ming also smiled and said, Do you want me to agree with the materialization of the soul, Shiro Amakusa? Shiro Amakusa continued to smile. That's right. Don't you think that the materialization of the soul is the only way to save humanity? You don't want humanity to repeat the same mistakes you've made in Britain, Vilo Silensword. Then, the scene fell into silence. After a moment, Wu Ming spoke. Yes, humans will indeed repeat the same mistakes. Shiro Amakusa smiled. The others also looked at Shiro Amakusa and Wu Ming in disbelief. If it was me in the past, I might have agreed with you. But Wu Ming thought of his experience in Babylon and thought of Gilgamesh, who wanted to free humanity from the shackles of the gods. Now, I definitely won't agree with you, Shiro Amakusa. Wu Ming raised Meteor Silver, which had already returned to its original state, and pointed the tip of the sword at Shiro Amakusa. The helmet automatically put on. Is that so? Shiro Amakusa closed his eyes and said regretfully. When he opened his eyes, Shiro Amakusa didn't have the slightest bit of hatred, only calmness. At this moment, this was the saint who had given up on hatred and walked out of the Great Holy Grail, Shiro Amakusa, Shurjun. Then I will kill everyone who stands in my way. With these words, a war was about to break out. Atlanta took the initiative to release her noble artifact. Present this calamity. Foibos Kachif. Large amounts of lightning shot towards Wu Ming's group, but what collided with them was a large amount of green lightning. Blasted tree. Frankenstein used his incomplete noble phantasm to clash with it. Although Frankenstein didn't speak much, it didn't mean that she couldn't speak. In her words, it was just that it took a lot of effort to speak. Astolfo rode his eagle and rushed towards Atlanta, but he was stopped by Achilles in midair. Get down. Achilles leaped up and chopped down the eagle and Astolfo with his spear. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! When Achilles landed on the ground, a few arrows shot into his shoulder and thigh. Charon stood in the distance with his bow raised, ready to knock an arrow again. Suddenly, he felt a huge threat and quickly dodged. A few chains made of poison pierced where Charon was standing just now. TSK, he dodged it. Am I so weak now that I've lost my noble artifact? Semiramis said unhappily. As soon as Semiramis finished speaking, Charon felt a slight discomfort in his body. He quickly activated the crystal that Wu Ming gave him, and the feeling was gone. That was Hydra's poison, Charon said with lingering fear. Everyone, be careful. The surroundings are filled with poison, Charon shouted. The others nodded and activated the detoxification crystal that Wu Ming gave them, including the two masters, Sieg and Collins. Jean, go and take care of Red Assassin. I'll deal with Shiro Amakusa, Wu Ming said to Jean. Okay. Jean simply nodded, then raised the holy flag and rushed toward Semiramis. Suddenly, Wu Ming threw a ring to Jean. This was the ring that Wu Ming wore on his hand, the Ouroboros ring. Although Wu Ming didn't know how to use this world-class item, it had a special function. Wear it and you can resist Red Caster's spiritual attack. Joan of Arc nodded heavily and rushed towards Semiramis. Mordred, do as you say. After hearing Wu Ming's words, Mordred grinned and bumped her fists, then said, Then I must teach that poisonous woman a lesson. Wu Ming, on the other hand, was facing Shiro Amakusa, Shurjun. As the leader of the believers, Shiro Amakusa was already very good for him to have such martial arts skills. But if the enemy was Wu Ming, Shiro Amakusa had no ability to resist. Bang! Shiro Amakusa's body rolled and stopped in front of the Great Holy Grail. Pwah! Shiro Amakusa spat out a mouthful of blood and struggled to stand up. Then Shiro Amakusa once again rushed toward Wu Ming and roared, Vilos Saranth! Bang! Another blow, and Shiro Amakusa once again collapsed on the ground. Wu Ming looked at Shiro Amakusa, who was struggling to get up, and sighed. Shiro Amakusa, you still don't want to give up? Wu Ming looked at the battle between the other servants. Sharon, Astolfo, Frankenstein, Achilles, and Atlanta were fighting, especially Sharon and Achilles. Because it was not a one-on-one battle, neither of them fought as a warrior, but as an archer and a rider. Astolfo and Frankenstein constantly harassed Achilles, coupled with Charon's godlike archery skills. Although Achilles used his noble phantasm, Charon had already used his once-a-day noble phantasm, Scorpio Strike, to break Achilles' immortality, which was the noble phantasm, Andreas Amarantos. Damn it! Achilles, who was on the chariot, cursed, and then just when he wanted to take out his trump card noble phantasm, Achilles Cosmos, several powerful arrows flew at Achilles. Because Atlanta was entangled by Frankenstein, and Astolfo was constantly harassing them in the sky, Achilles could not take out his trump card. "Do you think I will let you take out that shield, Achilles?" Charon said to Achilles, and once again drew his bow. "Charon!" Achilles was angry again, and he drove the chariot toward Charon, but this time Astolfo seized the opportunity. Trap of Argalia! Astolfo rode the eagle and pierced the chariot's wheels with his spear, and the wheels were forcibly spiritualized. Achilles quickly jumped out of the chariot, and Atlanta just happened to avoid Frankenstein's attack and jumped to Achilles' side. At this moment, Astolfo, Frankenstein, and Charon surrounded Achilles and Atlanta in a tripartite formation. On the other side, Joan of Arc and Mordred were fighting against Semiramis and Shakespeare. It seemed to be a 2v2, but it was actually a 2v1. After all, Shakespeare had no combat power at all. "What the hell are you doing? Castor! Where is your noble phantasm? Hurry up and use it!" Semiramis was repelled by Joan of Arc and roared at Shakespeare. "My noble phantasm doesn't work on Joan of Arc, Empress, you have to do your best." Shakespeare bowed to Shakespeare and said very elegantly. Joan of Arc looked at the Ouroboros on her hand, clenched it, and rushed toward Semiramis again. The special ability of the Ouroboros ring was the protection of the world. World's blessing. As the incarnation of the world devoured by the devourer of 9 luminaries' world, it has the blessing of a world. Although this statement was very vague, Wuming knew that a tool transformed from a world was not that simple, at least it had resistance to mental attacks. Sure enough, the world's path had the power to resist mental attack. Just when Semiramis was ready to resist Joan of Arc's attack, a voice broke through the air. "Take this, poisonous woman." Chapter 92. Semiramis' pupils instantly froze as she raised her head to look at Mordred, who was falling from the sky. "Poochie! Ah!" Mordred's brilliant imperial sword cut through Semiramis' chest and blood spilled all over the ground. "Checkmate, poisonous woman." Mordred turned around to look at Semiramis, who had fallen to the ground, and said proudly. Joan of Arc also walked in front of Shakespeare and said to him, "Red Castor, do you still want to resist?" Shakespeare hurriedly waved his hand. No, I really don't have the ability to fight. I surrender." Saying that, Shakespeare raised his hand. "You bastard, do you have to be so spineless? You actually surrendered." Mordred said viciously. No, this is a wise choice." Shakespeare's face was full of joy. Turning around, Wuming looked at Shiro Amakusa. "You see, you have already lost, Shiro Amakusa." Shiro Amakusa, Shurjin, continued to stand up and slowly said, "So what?" Shiro Amakusa stared at Wuming. "You want to use failure to change my mind about saving humanity. 400 years ago, when we were slaughtered by the shogunate, I didn't retreat. How can death and failure make me change my mind about saving humanity?" After a moment, Wuming looked at Shiro Amakusa, who had calmed down a little. He took off his helmet and looked at Shiro Amakusa. "You are not wrong, Shiro Amakusa. However, this is a war where the winner takes all. The loser will lose the opportunity to realize their dreams." After hearing Wuming's words, Shiro Amakusa laughed again. "What a pity," Vilo there answered. "The Great Holy Grail has already been activated." As if to confirm Shiro Amakusa's words, the Great Holy Grail behind him began to gradually glow and slowly sank into the ground. "Originally, I wanted to use the Space Garden to move the Great Holy Grail and spread the Third Law all over the world. However, now that the Space Garden has been destroyed, the Great Holy Grail has coincidentally come into contact with a spirit vein. At this moment, it has already begun to use the spirit vein to spread the third law all over the world, realizing the materialization of all humans. My wish is about to come true, Shiro Amakusa said very calmly. Aren't you afraid that I'll destroy the Great Holy Grail if you tell me all this now? Wuming wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he continued his conversation with Shiro Amakusa. In response, Shiro Amakusa shook his head and said, "You won't. Everyone who participated in the Holy Grail War has their own wishes. Even you, Villotharanst, are the same." Shiro Amakusa was right. Every servant who participated in the Holy Grail War had their own wishes. No one would destroy the Great Holy Grail before it was completely beyond saving. Wuming believed that even Artoria would not take the initiative to destroy the Holy Grail. Unfortunately, Wuming didn't have any wishes that needed to be fulfilled. Moreover, he didn't believe that a mere large-scale magic storage system would be able to fulfill all his wishes. The suppression force once told him that the Holy Grail War was a ritual created by the three families of Macri, Ainsberg, and Enosaka to reach the origin. The original purpose was to reach the origin. The Great Holy Grail could temporarily open the door to the origin vortex. Through this door, the magician could directly reach the origin. Therefore, the matter of fulfilling all wishes was purely a rumor. Of course, some small wishes could still be fulfilled. After all, this was a magical power that could open the door to the origin vortex. Shiro Amakusa entered the Great Holy Grail system through his own noble phantasm. Through the incomplete third magic that came with the Great Holy Grail, Shiro Amakusa made a wish to save all of humanity, allowing the third magic to spread throughout the world. Is that so? But you won't see the end. Goodbye, Shiro Amakusa. You are a person worthy of respect. His hand rose and his sword fell. With a smile on his face, Shiro Amakusa fell to the ground. The other servants of the red team began to leave because of the death of their master, Shiro Amakusa. Achilles and Atlanta looked at their bodies gradually disappearing and gave up resistance. Sharon, Astolfo, and Frankenstein also did not continue to attack. What a pity, One-san. Achilles smiled. Ah, that's right. It's a pity that we can't see the end, but the Great Holy Grail has been activated. It's just a matter of time, Atlanta said calmly without the slightest regret or rejoice. Then Achilles looked at Sharon. Sensei, this one-on-one duel was interrupted. Next time, we must determine the winner. Of course, Achilles. I look forward to the moment when you defeat me. The wind came, and Achilles and Atlanta disappeared into light. On the other side, Semiramis lay on the ground powerlessly, looking at the body of Shiro Amakusa. Master, I actually feel sad. What's wrong with me? The famous Empress of Assyria left the stage. Oh. This is really a wonderful comedy. I am very satisfied. Shakespeare wrote the script and disappeared into particles. At this point, the red team servants of the Great Holy Grail left except for Mordred. So, what about the Great Holy Grail? It seems that it can't be stopped. Astolfo stood beside Sieg. Sieg, Cowles, and Leo were unable to get involved in the battle of servants as humans, so they were slightly away from the battlefield before the start. Do we really have to destroy this? That's such a pity, Mordred grumbled. It seems that this is the only way. Jean said carefully. After all, not every servant would sacrifice their wish for humans. Wuming looked at the several servants present. Sharon, Astolfo, Frankenstein, Mordred, and Jean. In addition to himself and Jean, there were 5 servants. Sharon was the first to speak. I choose to give up. Instead of restoring my immortal body, it's better to choose to save humans. I also give up. Anyway, I don't have any important wish. It doesn't matter. This is also for Master. Astolfo smiled and then looked at Sieg. I don't need the Holy Grail. My people have been saved. I thank Sodric again. No, Mr. Villo. Sieg bowed to Wu Ming. You don't have to do this, Sieg. This is also my agreement with Sieg. Wu Ming waved his hand, indicating that Sieg didn't need to do this. Ho ho! Frankenstein also shook his head. Although he didn't know why Frankenstein didn't hesitate, perhaps Cowles had already prepared himself mentally in advance. I also give up. We will solve the matter of our Eugomarinia family, Cowles said firmly. I don't need the Holy Grail. I have found my real wish. This time, let's forget about it. Mordred laughed. Leo was a little surprised and then fell into deep thought. Then Leo opened his mouth. Then I will also give up. Mordred smiled knowingly and looked at Leo Gielli. Leo Gielli also smiled knowingly and bumped their fists. In that case, Master, use all the command seals to support me. I am going to change my class. Huh? Everyone was surprised. Chapter 93. Wait, what did you say? Change classes? Leo Gielli asked in surprise. Really? Is this something that a servant can do? Collins asked Wu Ming. The others also looked at Wu Ming in shock. In this regard, Wu Ming smiled. Of course, my own strength is still limited, but if I rely on this, then, Wu Ming said, then pointed to the Great Holy Grail behind him. You mean rely on the Great Holy Grail to make a wish? But the Great Holy Grail has now been made a wish by Shiro Amakusa. Leo Gielli was very puzzled. Although the Great Holy Grail has been made a wish by Shiro Amakusa, don't forget that this Great Holy Grail was directly taken away by Danica in the middle of the Third Holy Grail War 60 years ago. In other words, the Great Holy Grail has stored 120 years of magic. Even if Shiro Amakusa has made a wish, there is still some magic left in the Great Holy Grail. With the command seal provided by Master, it is enough for me to change classes. Wu Ming explained. Then what class do you want to change? Karen asked the question that everyone wanted to ask. Wu Ming smiled mysteriously and said, Of course it's the caster class. But, even if you are a Villo of the Knights of the Round Table, I remember that Villo only knows some small magic. That should not be enough to deal with the current situation, right? Leo Gielli asked. You can rest assured that my body is the original dragon. How can I only have one identity? Everyone then remembered that Wu Ming had previously said that he had many experiences in other worlds. Since Wu Ming could go to other worlds, there was no guarantee that Wu Ming had other identities in this world. Afterward, Lion Jia Jieli sighed. I understand. Then I will use the command change class as the command and use the command seal. After a while, the ruins around the Great Holy Grail were cleared by the party. Then, Wu Ming took out all kinds of ores, gems, and other tools that could be used to construct magic circles in Draconist. He melted them with his mana and began to draw a summoning circle in front of the Great Holy Grail. After all, changing classes was something inconceivable for a servant, so he had to be cautious. That was why Wu Ming used the summoning circle. After Wu Ming finished his preparations, he stood in the center of the magic array. Let's begin, Master, Wu Ming said to Jieli. Yes. Everyone stood not far away from the lion's realm of calamity, watching this unbelievable scene with rapt attention. Jieli the lion raised his hand that held Wu Ming's command seal. At the cost of all command incantations, my servant Sodric, change your class. After Lion Jia Jia finished speaking, the command incantation in his hand emitted a red light and disappeared. Wu Ming felt the power of the command incantation and began to make a wish. Great Holy Grail, fulfill my wish and let me change my class. In an instant, the Great Holy Grail began to shine. The magic lines around the magic array where Wu Ming stood also began to shine. The light became brighter and brighter. Everyone began to be unable to bear it and raised their hands to cover their eyes. After about 10 seconds, the light began to weaken. Everyone once again looked at the place where Wu Ming stood. Wu Ming was wearing a white robe. His originally black hair had turned golden. He held an ancient book of unknown origins in his hand. He looked holy, and his surroundings were filled with a holy aura. What happened? Is the contract broken? Everyone heard Jieli the lion's words and then looked at him. The command incantation that Lion Jie used on Jie's hand disappeared without a trace. According to the records of the Holy Grail War, a command incantation would leave a trace after it was used. Even if the contract was broken or the Holy Grail War ended, the command incantation would not disappear. Only the traces of the command incantation would disappear. But now, the Holy Grail War was not over yet, and the traces of the command incantation disappeared. Moreover, Jieli also clearly stated that the contract was broken. "Don't worry." A particularly gentle voice came. Collins and Jieli were a little absent-minded, but then the two of them quickly woke up. Several other servants were also slightly absent-minded, but it did not affect them much. And because Sieg had Siegfried's heart, his resistance was comparable to that of a servant. Only Jean d'Arc could resist the strange holiness emitted by Wu Ming. "What's going on, Sodric? Or are you no longer Sodric?" Jean asked Wu Ming, somewhat at a loss. Everyone looked at Wu Ming with some vigilance. Wu Ming only smiled faintly at this, causing people to become absent-minded again. "I'm sorry. After all, this is the first time I've adapted to this class. I'm still a little uncomfortable with my own power." After Wu Ming finished speaking, everyone felt that the sacred aura on Wu Ming's body was covered up. Phew, that was really scary. I felt like I was worshipping Sodric just now. Collins wiped the cold sweat from the lingering fear. That's true. If Sodric spreads this sacred aura to the maximum extent, some people with low spiritual power will become his believers. I'm afraid some berserkers will also be affected. As a person who firmly believed in the Lord, it was easy for Jean to see the essence of this power. That's really scary. Collins swallowed his saliva. At this moment, Collins was even more scared. Yes, after all, I didn't control my power. I'm sorry, Mr. Collins. Wu Ming said gently. About the breaking of the contract, it was my decision. After all, what I'm going to do later is a bit unbearable for Mr. Jieli. Therefore, I linked the contract to the Holy Grail. What? Doesn't that mean that you have infinite magic power now? Astolfo cried out in surprise. Wu Ming smiled and replied, "That's not the case. Although I'm linked to the Holy Grail, I can't use the Holy Grail's magical power. Now I just have an unconscious master who can provide more magical power. In short, just like me, the Holy Grail provides magical power directly, but magical power can't be abused at will," Jean explained. I see. Astolfo's left hand turned into a fist and his right hand turned into a palm. By the way, everyone, I'm no longer Sodric. I know you're not Sodric, but I can't figure out what your identity is. I can't even see your real name with my master's ability," Jieli said while touching his chin. Everyone looked at Jean d'Arc, and Jean d'Arc nodded and began to use true name detection on Wu Ming. This is? Chapter 94. Is this true? Zod. No, I should call you Hyunryong, Sama. Jean was surprised. In an instant, everyone fell into silence. Wait, Hyunryong, is that Hyunryong? Lion Jieli shouted. Hey! Is it true? Is it really Hyunryong? Collins was also quite surprised. The servants were okay, after all, they were heroes. But Sieg was puzzled. What does Hyunryong refer to? After all, Sieg was an android who was born less than a year ago. Even if he had Siegfried's heart, he was still an android who was less than a year old. Let me tell you. Astolfo raised his hand. When it comes to Hyunryong, he is the guardian of the ancient Babylonian city of Uruk. After all, no matter in the mythology of any other country or race, there is no character who can be called the Sage Dragon. Legend has it that Hyunryong is the oldest God who can't stand the human race being ruled by the gods and secretly came down to help the human race become independent. Later, Lion Jieli went on to say, Hyunryong is the oldest God in Mesopotamia. His status as a God can be compared with Tiamat, the Sumer mythical creator of Mesopotamia. But it is more said that Hyunryong is the son of Tiamat, the god of Sumer mythical pantheon. In addition to the 11 magical beasts born by Tiamat, he is also the elder brother of the 11 magical beasts. Collins added. But for some reason, the virtuous dragon did not belong to the side of the gods, nor did it belong to the side of the magical beast. One day, it descended upon the city of Uruk and became the guardian god of mankind, Sharon said. Legend has it that Hyunryong is quite mysterious. He has neither a fixed name nor a fixed body. The reason why he is called Hyunryong is because in the oldest epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he came to Uruk in the form of a dragon and cultivated the oldest king, the hero king, Gilgamesh. As the symbol of the end of the gods, he has the title of sage. Back to Astolfo. Amazing! Does this mean that the French general Sodlek is a Sumerian god? Sieg exclaimed in shock. Everyone thought about it and realized that it was indeed as Sieg had said. The French general Sodlek was a Sumerian god. At this moment, Wuming seemed a little unnatural. How would I know that just because I taught the ancient king on a whim, the restraints turned me into such a fantasy legend? What Tiamat? What Lord God? Do you believe such nonsense? Even if there are historical records, do you believe it? Oh my God! But on the surface, Wuming still maintained a smile. But reality proved that the two restraints once again created an invincible identity for Wuming. Although the origin dragon would become as invincible as the legends said after reaching adulthood, Wuming was still quite a distance away from adulthood. For now, Wuming only had a strong life force and powerful support-type talents. There was still a long way to go before he could reach the level of the god of creation, Tiamat. Ahem. Alright, everyone, don't get so worked up. After all, I'm a special dragon who can freely roam through all eras. It's not a problem to have more legends. Also, when I'm a character, I can't use powers outside of the norm. Otherwise, that era will instantly reject me. Also, just continue to call me Sodlek. After all, as Hyunryong, I don't have a real name. Everyone understood. After all, in the historical records, there was indeed no mention of Hyunryong. There was only the name Hyunryong. After everyone calmed down, only Jean seemed to be unable to let go of something. She seemed to be thinking about something. But because time was tight, Jean didn't intend to ask anything here. Of course, Wu Ming also realized it. As someone who grew up and died with Joan of Arc, how could he not know what his childhood sweetheart was thinking? But just as Joan of Arc thought, there wasn't much time left. Wu Ming flipped through the uninscribed incantation book in his hand, and large amounts of unknown magic appeared on the Great Holy Grail. Now, almost half of the Great Holy Grail had sunk into the ground. So, I'm going to take the exam, Wu Ming said. Everyone was a little surprised. They thought that Wu Ming had already started. In fact, they weren't wrong. Wu Ming had indeed started, but after becoming caster, he became interested in the Great Holy Grail. Of course, it wasn't a wish, but an interest in the third method. Therefore, Wu Ming decided, ancient and eternal primordial dragon, show yourself and save the world once more. As soon as his voice fell, a large amount of magic began to gather from the Great Holy Grail into Wu Ming's body. Then, Wu Ming's noble artifact began to appear. Heaven Age. At this moment, everyone, including the entire Romania and even the powerful magicians all over the world, felt an extraordinary pressure. A huge silver-white dragon appeared out of thin air. It was mysterious and sacred, giving people a sense of worship. Lion Jie and Cowles had already knelt down and were mumbling to themselves. Sieg struggled, his legs bent. Because of Sieg's heart, he was not like Leo Gielli and Collins. Astolfo supported Sieg on the side, although he was also uncomfortable. Even with the enhancement of the noble relic, the white dragon was still able to affect Astolfo. The other servants were the same. Those who had magic affinity were fine. Those who didn't have magic affinity were almost the same as Sieg. Tulifas and all the residents of Romania were like pilgrims, kneeling in the direction of the great white dragon. The great white dragon landed and looked at Wu Ming and the others. Then, without saying anything, he directly grabbed the great holy grail that had sunk into the ground with his hand. Like an uprooted tree, dust flew everywhere. Then, the great white dragon grabbed the spherical great holy grail with one claw and flew into the sky. Maybe because it was the first time he used this noble artifact, Wu Ming triggered the punishment of this era. Just as the dragon's body gradually became transparent, as if it was about to disappear, a lightning bolt appeared out of thin air and struck the dragon. However, the great white dragon did not howl, but disappeared. At this time, the great white dragon that affected Romania and even the whole world left. The humans who were affected by the great white dragon's sacred breath were gradually recovering at this moment. When Leo Gielli and Collins came back to their senses, they saw a group of extremely weak servants, including Wu Ming. Just now that was. Collins stuttered. Wu Ming gasped and replied, "That was my original body, the original dragon at the root." Yes, one of Wu Ming's noble artifacts as a caster was to summon his original body. After all, Wu Ming was now using a body purely composed of magic. Wu Ming summoned his original body that was sleeping in the root. At the moment when the great white dragon appeared, the great white dragon and Wu Ming had the same thought, just like Wu Ming was controlling the great white dragon, or the great white dragon was controlling Wu Ming, the two were the same person. The original body that was summoned by Wu Ming's noble artifact as a caster did not have the ability to travel through the world on its own, and it also became rejected by the world. Although it was hard to believe, it was the truth. But because the modern era was the era of the disappearance of high-level mysterious creatures such as the great white dragon, the era would not allow such creatures to appear in the world. Therefore, when the great white dragon left, the punishment of the era came. The great white dragon seemed to be unaffected, but in fact it was all fed back to Wu Ming. At this moment, the magic in Wu Ming's body was almost exhausted. That's right, the EX-level magic was almost exhausted now. Because Wu Ming used magic to offset the damage of the punishment on himself, it had not completely offset the punishment brought by the era. "It's terrible," Leo Gielli said. Yes, that involuntary kneeling from the heart was terrible. Chapter 95. Indeed, after all, it's my first time using this noble phantasm. I subconsciously activated the sacred aura emitted by my body. I'm really sorry, everyone, Wu Ming said with a face full of guilt. Wu Ming's noble phantasm would open a channel in his body. This channel was big enough to accommodate his body, and small enough to accommodate even a scale. In other words, Wu Ming could achieve the emergence of part of his body by not fully releasing this noble phantasm. Imagine that when the opponent released a big move, he could suddenly summon the invincible dragon scale in front of him, blocking the enemy's attack. He could also summon the sharp dragon claw in his hand and use it as a weapon. As for his other noble phantasms, except for the inscription book, the other noble phantasms were obtained through sublimation. Wu Ming couldn't help but think of the two major restraints. There was no doubt that many noble phantasms of his caster class were their masterpieces, including his caster class template. I didn't expect that, Villo. You're so strong. If you weren't forced to leave, Father might not have to work so hard. Even if Mordred was weak because of the white dragon, she was still full of energy when she spoke. However, this unintentional sentence made Wu Ming silent. Perhaps she realized that she had said something wrong, so Mordred quickly changed the topic. By the way, where did your body go with the great Holy Grail? Wuming breathed a sigh of relief, then said with a smile, "Of course, it's the origin." Everyone had an expression of, "Sure enough. My body has been sleeping in the origin. I just woke it up for a moment and summoned it to the present world, and I have to prepare to bear the punishment given by the era. This time I almost died," Wuming said and coughed a few times. Jean walked behind Wuming and shook Wuming's back. "Are you okay?" Jean looked at Wuming tenderly. No matter who Wuming was, he had always been Jean's childhood sweetheart, the one who was willing to be burned to death. "It's nothing serious. Don't worry." Wuming held Joan of Arc's hand and said tenderly, "I have a question. Since the great Holy Grail is no longer in this world, why haven't we disappeared yet?" Astolfo raised his hand and asked the others. "That's right. The Holy Grail has already disappeared, but our contract still exists, and it shows no signs of disappearing." Sharon analyzed. "What's going on?" Everyone was puzzled. "Let me explain." Wuming stood up and looked at the servants and masters. "Because when I was moving the great Holy Grail, I deliberately delayed your contracts for a period of time. This way you can stay in the modern world and experience life. If you don't use a relic, you can survive for about 3 months. What? I thought it would always be there." Astolfo was a little dejected. "It's okay, Ryder. Even if it's only for 3 months, I'll still accompany you. Let's travel around the world together. I want to see this world and connect with the humans of this world," Sieg said from the side. "Yes, Master." Looking at the rejuvenated Astolfo, the other servants couldn't help but laugh, and then they thought about how to spend the rest of their time. "That's it for the time being. As long as you don't do anything that violates the rules of the servants and be ordinary people, I believe our Saintess won't say anything." "Right, Saintess," Wuming said softly to Joan of Arc. "Cough. Since everyone helped me solve this crisis, I, as the ruler, allow everyone to move freely until we return to the Valhalla, but you can't use your power at will to avoid unnecessary trouble." Joan of Arc looked deeply at Wuming and then said, "Especially you, Soderlek. You will be personally supervised by me. That's it." In this regard, Wuming smiled awkwardly, followed by the others. "If you don't mind, the Eugomarinia family can provide you with food, clothing, housing, and transportation for the time being." Collins said, "The biggest problem at present. Then we won't be polite, and with us, we should be able to fight for a big advantage when dealing with the Clock Tower and the Magic Association," Wuming said with a smile. Looking at Wuming's smiling face, Collins smiled awkwardly. He did have such an idea, but he wanted to express his gratitude for this time. After all, in the case of Danik's death, Wuming had the power to destroy the Eugomarinia family, but Wuming didn't do so. Although this was the intention of using the Eugomarinia family, when Collins' sister Fiole was facing Jack the Ripper, Wuming appeared to save Fiole. Based on this alone, Collins, who was already the acting patriarch, was grateful. Wuming also knew that Collins was grateful, and dealing with the clock tower was just a matter of convenience. After all, Wuming was not a bad person, and Wuming felt that the current Eugomarinia family was very good, so he would definitely help if he could. "Don't worry about that for now. Let's go drink, Villo," Mordred shouted excitedly. Wuming looked at Jean subconsciously. "Drinking is bad for the body. Please drink less. I won't follow you. I'll wait for you at the Eugomarinia family. Remember to come back early in the evening," Jean said naturally. However, Mordred complained, "What? Ruler, you are like a housekeeper. Drinking is a rare entertainment for us knights of the Round Table." As if thinking of something, Mordred said again, "By the way, it seems that because you took the soldiers to drink secretly, you were often taught a lesson by father and others." Looking at the bright smile on Mordred's face, Wuming smiled and said, "If I didn't take the soldiers to drink, how could a lonely guy like you live so comfortably?" Then Jieli complained, I knew it. I didn't know that the rebellious knight liked to drink. So it was you who taught him. Really, my wallet has shrunk a lot recently. Ha 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 ha. It doesn't matter. Anyway, your money is useless. You might as well spend it. Mordred laughed and patted Jieli's back. It's going to break, it's going to break. Wu-Ming recalled the past at this moment with a nostalgic look on his face. It was because of those who passed away that Wu-Ming was able to grow. Moreover, Wu-Ming looked at Jean, and Jean also looked at Wu-Ming. The two looked at each other and smiled. Looking at the slowly rising sun, Wu-Ming said to the group behind him, Let's go, everyone. Chapter 96. Because of the mysterious arrival, nearly 3 months had passed since the world was in turmoil. From that day on, Wu-Ming accompanied Collins to the Time Tower. Because Wu-Ming didn't deliberately hide his power, he deliberately released a trace of his power, causing a sensation in the Time Tower. After all, he was a top heroic spirit that could cause a higher level of mystery to descend. Not only did the 12 monarchs of the Time Tower appear together, but even the Marshal of the Demon Path, Kithiazilik Ashobin Ogu, invited Wu-Ming to his office and had a secret conversation with only the two of them. After almost an hour of secret conversation, Kishua Zelrich Subian Ogu indicated that as long as Cowles, the head of the family, could become a student of the Clock Tower, it could offset the crime of the Ugomarinia family. Of course, Wu-Ming also gave Kithiazilik Ashobin Ogu something special, which made the Time Tower and the Magic Association not dissatisfied with forgiving the Ugomarinia family so easily. Wu-Ming's evaluation of him, a cunning old fox. At that time, Zelik said, After all, Hyunryong Sama gave me a good gift, so let's leave it at that for the time being. Wu-Ming was speechless. He dared to say that the gift to the Magic Association was his own. In fact, no one would dare to say anything even if that was the case. Kithiazilik Ashobin Ogu was beyond human standards. On this day, 3 months later, in a villa provided by Ugomarinia in France for Wu-Ming, Wu-Ming sat on a stone in the yard with his hands on his knees and meditated for a long time. First, Wu-Ming's former saber rank limited the progress of meditation. Second, the body of a servant was not suitable for cultivation. After all, this was a degraded version of a heroic spirit. Its attributes were fixed, and even if it cultivated, it would not increase in the slightest. But for Wu-Ming there was a benefit. After Wu-Ming summoned his main body, Wu-Ming found that his main body had an indescribable feeling. Wu-Ming felt that because the limiter temporarily disappeared when he summoned the main body, all the training that Wu-Ming got from the servant body returned to the main body. Although there would not be an actual increase in strength, there was a familiar feeling. Even if he trained again, it would only take a short period of time for him to integrate everything that Wu-Ming had experienced, trained, and obtained in the servant's body, including the relic. The existence of the relic was the most powerful thing that Wu-Ming had obtained. Wu-Ming's noble phantoms were different from Wu-Ming's noble phantoms when he was a servant. There was no level restriction. In other words, Wu-Ming's noble phantoms were a special item called noble phantoms. It was much more powerful than the servant's noble phantoms. Because of this, Wu-Ming would pick up the daily meditation that he abandoned when he was using the servant's body. Well, actually, Wu-Ming's injuries hadn't healed yet. He was also recuperating. After a while, Wu-Ming took a deep breath, and a turbid gas was expelled from Wu-Ming's body. Wu-Ming opened his eyes and frowned as he looked at the gas that was about to dissipate. Wu-Ming used magic to draw a symbol in the air. In an instant, flames ignited out of thin air and burned the turbid gas. After all, it was a magical gas that had been eroded by the power of the era. It was not good to leave it in the real world. Therefore, every time Wu-Ming expelled such a gas, he would use the Loon magic to burn it out. I didn't expect the power of the era to be so terrifying. I can't imagine what kind of terrifying attack I would have suffered if I didn't adapt to time and space. Wu Ming couldn't help but think of everything he had done in the time and space tunnel before. But in retrospect, if Wu Ming didn't have the power of time and space, he wouldn't have entered the time and space tunnel. Wu Ming shook his head and stood up from the stone. He looked at the house that he had lived in for nearly 3 months. I'm really reluctant to part with it. What's there to be reluctant to part with? A girl came in from the gate. She had almost the same appearance as Jeanne d'Arc, but Wu Ming found that this was not Jeanne d'Arc. It's nothing. Did school end so early today? Letitia. Yes, this girl who looked almost the same as Jeanne d'Arc was the French girl Letitia, who was possessed by Jeanne d'Arc. After the end of the Holy Grail War, in order to facilitate the girl possessed by Jeanne d'Arc, Cowles specially gave a private villa in France of Eugomarinia to Wu Ming and Jeanne d'Arc. It provided for the two of them to live in these 3 months. Letitia, on the other hand, would take leave from school every day and return to this villa. In this way, Jeanne d'Arc stayed in Letitia's body during the day, enjoying the fun of being a student, and returned to the villa at night to live with Wu Ming. Of course, they slept in separate rooms. After all, the two were still friends and not lovers. Wu Ming, on the other hand, had a very comfortable recovery for 3 months. He quietly lived the life of an ordinary person and recovered from the damage caused by the era. Because Letitia usually didn't come back at this time, but after this time, Wu Ming asked Letitia, who came back early, after finishing his daily meditation. The Holy Virgin wanted to come back to spend these last days with you, so I came back early to give you more time to get together. Letitia smiled sweetly and explained to Wu Ming. Speaking of which, time really flies. 3 months have passed in the blink of an eye. Wu Ming sighed. Then, with a flash of light, Letitia turned into Jeanne d'Arc. Speaking of which, even I, the ruler of the Holy Grail War, find it a bit unbelievable. The Great Holy Grail has disappeared. Does this mean that the Holy Grail War is over? Jeanne d'Arc and Wu Ming walked into the villa together. Jeanne d'Arc said. Wu Ming just smiled at Jeanne d'Arc's naive words. You also know that the Great Holy Grail is nothing more than a shortcut created by human magicians to reach the source of power. Even if it's gone, it can still be recreated. Besides, there are still great holy grails in other parallel worlds. Heroic spirits are mystical life forms that can transcend time and space. Even if this world no longer has a Holy Grail War, there will still be one in other worlds. We will appear again. Wu Ming also knew that Jeanne d'Arc was just simply looking forward to it. After all, Jeanne d'Arc also understood a lot of things after becoming a heroic spirit. Wu Ming continued, to put it bluntly, as long as there are creatures like humans, things like desire will not disappear. Really, Wu Ming, you are still so rough, not gentle at all. Jeanne d'Arc complained to Wu Ming. Then, Jeanne d'Arc ran in front of Wu Ming, turned her head and looked at Wu Ming with a smile. Then, let's enjoy these last moments, Cedric. After saying that, she walked to the kitchen and began to cook. Really, what can a village girl like you cook? Although he complained like this, Wu Ming was still looking forward to it. Chapter 97. The next day, the servants that the Magic Association was afraid of disappeared collectively on this day. After all, this kind of uncontrollable power was still very feared by some of the higher-ups of the Magic Association. Early in the morning, Wu Ming and Jeanne sat at the dining table, eating breakfast made by Letitia. Because Joan of Arc once messed up breakfast, Letitia had no choice but to make it. Jeanne looked at Wu Ming, who had been smiling, and said with a red face, "Really, I wasn't familiar with the kitchen at that time. It was an accident." However, Wu Ming said with a happy face, "Yes, yes." Later, breakfast ended with Wu Ming's happy and Jeanne's complaints. After breakfast, Wu Ming didn't meditate, and Jeanne didn't go to school. The two walked slowly on the road, looking at the scenery that they were already familiar with. After a while, Jean said, "Hey, Sodric, will we have a chance to meet again in the future?" Wuming didn't think and said directly, "Yes." Why are you so sure?" Jean was surprised. "That's because you haven't replied to me yet. I'll keep waiting," Wuming said half-jokingly. "Really, you're not serious again?" Jean's cheeks were red and she quickened her pace. In fact, Wuming was also telling the truth. After all, Wuming was not dead. Although Jean was already in the Hall of Valhalla, it shouldn't be a problem for Wuming to summon a Valhalla, probably. Wuming quickly caught up with Jean and began a different kind of last time. Finally, Wuming and Jean stood on a high ground, looking at the scenery in the distance. As if it was time, Jean turned and looked at Wuming. "Then, I'll go first, Wuming." "Well, see you next time, Jean." In the end, Wuming told Jean his real name. Jean's body emitted a light, and as a gust of wind blew, the light dissipated. Letitia appeared on the spot and looked at her hands in disbelief. Then, Letitia looked at Wuming in embarrassment. That. Lord Hyunryong, looking at the blushing Letitia, Wuming gently said, "Letitia, you've lived together for so long. Are you still afraid of strangers?" Letitia blushed even more after being exposed by Wuming. No. As expected, Sodric, you're still as wicked as ever." As she spoke, Letitia kissed Wuming's cheek under Wuming's shocked gaze. Then, she quickly ran away. Wuming was at a loss as he watched Letitia run away. When he came back to his senses, he touched the cheek that was kissed and said helplessly, "This is really—" Wuming sighed. Wuming guessed that when Letitia and Jean shared the same body, she often dreamed of Jean's dream, and gradually their feelings were assimilated. Then, Wuming shook his head, opened his mouth, and chanted a spell. Wuming disappeared on the spot. A moment later, London, England clock tower. Outside a room located at the highest point of the clock tower, a black-red ripple appeared. Wuming walked out. Wuming had a smile on his face. He wore a white robe, and his short blonde hair was overflowing with a holy aura. Wuming knocked on the door of the room. "Knock knock, come in." Wuming pushed the door open and entered. What he saw was a strong old man with red eyes, white hair, and a short white beard sitting in the dark room. "Oh, it's the virtuous dragon. Have the other servants returned to their seats?" Demonic Marshal Kitty Zelrich Subian Augustus asked. Wuming elegantly sat on the sofa, picked up the tea that had been prepared on the table, and took a sip. "Of course, I provided them with magic power and contract for only 3 months. Once the contract is broken, unless the servant's master is a true ancestor like you, it is impossible for them to continue to stay in the modern world." That's right, as the leader of the highest level of the Magic Association, the demonic path Marshal Keshua Zelrich Subian Augustus was a true ancestor. "Ha, that's all in the past. Who told me to lose to Zhuyu?" Zelik said with a laugh, not angry because of Wuming's words. "Zhuyu, everyone's Zhuyu Brunstad. She is the Moon King, equivalent to the moon's suppression power. Zhuyu was the first and strongest true ancestor in the world of the moon, so she was the origin of true ancestors and death apostles. Although Zelrich claimed that he had lost to the ancestor Zhuyu, the truth was that the two of them were tied. Zhuyu's body was destroyed by Zelik, but before Zhuyu's body was destroyed by Zelik, she turned Zelik into a death apostle. Thus, Kishia Zelik Augustus became one of the 27 death apostles. However, the great Holy Grail did fall into your hands. Zelik narrowed his eyes and said with a smile. In response, Wuming laughed. That is the third method. Even I, who is called Hyunryong, can't help but want to study it. Yes, although the great Holy Grail was taken away by Wuming to the origin, it was still under Wuming's protection and had not been assimilated by the origin. Wuming wanted to use the power of the origin to analyze the third method, and then master this power. Wuming took another sip of tea, then looked at Zelik and asked, "So, what do you want me to do, Kishia Zelik Augustus?" During the hour of Wuming and Zelika's secret conversation, the two of them sparred in this narrow room. Zelik used a second spell, so the two of them did not destroy the room because of their sparring. Because neither of them used their full strength, Wuming barely won against Zelik by one move. As an old man who had lived for hundreds of years, the victory of the battle was not important. Zelik made a request in exchange for the right to bail out the Ugomarinia family. Of course, Wuming did not agree, but Zelik gave Wuming an auxiliary magic dress in exchange for a second spell, and after a moment of consideration, Wuming agreed. The premise was that it could not be something that was harmful to Wuming. Zelik said at that time, "Even if I wanted to harm you, it is impossible. After all, you are the teacher of the ancient king, the descendant of Tiamat, the most mysterious dragon." But only Wuming himself knew that he was not strong enough to be compared to the creator of the Sumer pantheon, Tiamat. But after all, Zelik was the product of the second method in exchange, so Wuming had to think about it. After all, the 5 great spells of the shaped moon world were one of the most mysterious. As the second method was of the same origin as the third method, it would be of great help in analyzing the third method. Wuming asked Zelik to provide a magic dress with a powerful analysis ability. Zelik was a little puzzled. Even if it was a magic dress made by the second method, it should not be of much use to someone of Wuming's level. However, as a willful request of a partner, Zelik said that he had to add one more rule, which was that his request must be the first factor of action. Wuming said that as long as it was something he could do, he would try his best to do it as soon as possible. In this way, the two of them sat politely, drinking tea and chatting happily 3 months later. "I want to invite you to a parallel world." Chapter 98. Parallel World? Wuming put down the teacup in his hand and looked at Zelik with an expressionless face. "Yes, because a certain mysterious person in front of me has caused an even higher level of mystery to descend, my perception of other parallel worlds has become more sensitive. It's like a sixth sense that a world-destroying disaster will descend, and it's a disaster that will affect almost all parallel worlds." Zelik continued in a low voice, "Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to stop the disaster from happening, and I can't even lock onto its source. But now I know of your existence." Wuming sneered at this. "As the second Archmage, even Zhu Yu was dealt with by you. How can you not have a way to deal with this disaster that affects other parallel worlds?" Wuming did not doubt Zelika's judgment that was similar to a sixth sense. For someone of his level, and a full-time second Archmage in a parallel world, Zelika's premonition could be said to be incomparably accurate. Zelik was not angered by Wuming's sarcasm. He smiled and said, "Because I already know that I can't deal with this disaster by myself." Wuming thought for a moment and asked, "Is it because you went to other parallel worlds to try to deal with this disaster, but you found that you couldn't do anything to solve it, Zelik?" Zelik nodded and said, "That's right. I solved many things that I thought were the source of the disaster, but I found that my perception of other parallel worlds was still on the verge of destruction. So I came to find you. As an additional servant in this Holy Grail war, not only did you follow the Red Team's saber and summon her on your own, you also had many different identities throughout history. If it wasn't for the fact that I've talked to some heroic spirits before, I would even suspect that you were the one who played almost every role in history." Of course, Wuming also knew that Zelik was joking at the end, so he did not say anything about it. "Most importantly, you seem to have said that you didn't die." Wuming poured himself another cup of tea, then asked, "So, you think I can solve this crisis?" Zelik shook his head, then said, "Of course not, although I still don't know who solved this crisis. I can feel that that person has an unusual relationship with the heroic spirits." Zelik stood up and walked to a storage cabinet. "As for you, you're an extremely special heroic spirit. I'm sure you'll definitely have a connection with that person." Therefore, I'd like to invite you to a parallel world to find that person who can resolve the disasters. At the same time, you can resolve the disasters that often occur in parallel world. After all, the fewer disasters in other parallel worlds have, the later the disaster that will affect other parallel world. Zelik took out a box and threw it to Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming almost guessed what it was, and immediately opened it. Then, Zelik on the side said, "This is the magic dress you asked for. I specially made it in the shape of a crown. This should be very suitable for your caster profession." Wu-Ming looked at the golden luxurious crown. It's called a crown, but it's more like a ring. However, Wu-Ming doesn't care much about what this magic dress looks like, as long as it can be used. By the way, because I am afraid that you don't like its appearance, I deliberately set it as a magic dress that can automatically adjust its appearance. It is now in an inactive state. Moreover, I also set up an artificial elf for this magic dress. Of course, it is also in an inactive state. She will wake up at the moment you activate it and recognize you as the first master. Wu-Ming was very surprised. He didn't expect Zelik to be so concerned about this magic dress. In fact, even without these factors, Wu-Ming has a way to master this magic dress. It seems that you are very concerned about this matter, Zelik. Of course, Wu-Ming and Zelik both knew that Wu-Ming was talking about the disaster. Through the perfect production of the magic dress requested by Wu-Ming, Wu-Ming owed him a favor and had to pay attention to this matter. After all, the matter of the Eugomarinia family and the magic attire added together was enough for Wu-Ming to owe them a favor. Later, Wu-Ming said to Zelik, "Regardless of whether this magic dress is good or bad, I will do my best to fulfill your request and block my name Wu-Ming." Womian. Zelik pronounced the pronunciation of this word, as if thinking about the origin of this name or related things. "I'm sorry, my name is indeed Wu-Ming, but that's Chinese. It's a stranger name for you." After all, Wu-Ming was once picked up by the old people of the Celestial Dynasty. Even if Wu-Ming was not human, this did not diminish the name that accompanied Wu-Ming from the beginning. "So, when will you send me there?" Wu-Ming interrupted Zelika's contemplation. Zelik immediately replied, "I've decided to send you to the parallel world now. What do you think?" Wu-Ming stood up and put the crown in his hand into the open golden ripple. "Then let's begin." Zelik began to cast the second spell. Looking at the speed of casting, it seemed that he had already guessed that Wu-Ming would agree and had been gathering magic power. Just as Wu-Ming was about to be covered by the second spell, Wu-Ming said, "By the way, remember to take care of the people I know in this world. You're asking for a lot." Zelik, who was concentrating on casting the second spell, spoke up after a moment of silence. After all, this was transferring a high-ranked heroic spirit like Wu-Ming, so Zelik had to be cautious. However, an accident still happened. The era had left a deep impact on Wu-Ming. When he left this era, the era shifted to his destination. "Oh no." Zelik was shocked. "Vomian. Remember to look for me in that world, he'll help you." Before Zelik could finish, Wu-Ming vanished. Zelik, who had traveled to parallel worlds many times, knew that this was a normal phenomenon when traveling to other parallel worlds. Heaving a long sigh, Zelik returned to his original seat. In the face of a fate that humans cannot resist, what kind of miracle can he create? Zelik said as he took a sip of the freshly brewed tea. "I'm really looking forward to it." The clock tower detected that there were no abnormalities after the heroic spirits of the Holy Grail War disappeared. However, no one noticed that a different heroic spirit had left. The world returned to its peaceful state. On the other side, Wu-Ming opened his eyes and saw a quiet forest. It was night now, and the forest was silent. It was so quiet that it was terrifying. "That old man is really unreliable," Wu-Ming complained and began his adventure in the new world. Or rather, he had embarked on the path to saving the world. Chapter 99. Wu Ming thought and walked in a random direction. After a while, Wu Ming saw a small town through the forest. As the name implied, the town was not large. It was the kind of town that could be seen at a glance. Moreover, Wu Ming also found a lot of magical power in the center of the town. Obviously there was a small spiritual vein. Although it was not a lot for Wu Ming, it was likely to be a gathering place for a human family. Enchantments. Wu Ming clearly sensed that there were multiple enchantments in this town. Interesting. Wu Ming kept smiling and walked toward the seemingly ordinary town. Just when Wu Ming just walked to the edge of the town, a huge magical power erupted. A large amount of black mud, starting from the center of the town, continued to rotate and expand, like a storm of death, slowly sweeping the town. Wu Ming sensed that the magicians in the town were basically dead in this storm of death. At the same time, the barrier was also broken. At that moment, a strange power covered Wu Ming. Wu Ming looked in a certain direction with some surprise. Contract? Wu Ming frowned, then began to move quickly in the air. Several lune runes representing suppression appeared, and with a lot of magical power from Wu Ming, a large number of lune runes instantly covered the storm of death. In an instant, the black mud was suppressed and formed a black sphere. Black hole. As the spell was chanted, a hole similar to a black hole in the universe appeared, instantly sucking the black mud sphere and crushing it. Black hole was a new skill that Wu Ming learned from the uninscribed book when he left Nasaric. Because the uninscribed book was a magic book in Yggdrasil world tree. Although it was spread to the other world where Nazaric's underground tomb was located at that time, it also included Yggdrasil world tree magic. No, it should be said that the magic of that other world and Yggdrasil's magic were the same system, so they could be used together. After all, the magic of Yggdrasil world tree could be casually displayed. Wu Ming preferred to use the magic of Yggdrasil world tree, or rather, magic. But lune magic had an extraordinary effect at certain times, just like the lune rune combination used to suppress the black mud. Although Yggdrasil's magic was convenient, it was a game after all. Although there was the concept of seal, there was relatively little about this kind of magic. Moreover, this kind of seal represented invincibility and couldn't be attacked in the game. Wu Ming's purpose was to destroy the black mud. Naturally, it was impossible to use Yggdrasil's seal skill. That was also the drawback of Yggdrasil's transformation into reality. Seeing that the people who fled in panic had settled down, Wu Ming used rune magic to cast a diversion magic that could make pedestrians ignore his line of sight. Then, when the police set up obstacles to block him, he walked into the inverted semicircular hole destroyed by the black mud. Because Wu Ming was just contracted by someone. Moreover, Wu Ming felt the essence of the mysterious power, which was the wish-granting machine in the hand of his main body, the Holy Grail. After passing through a forest, Wu Ming saw a broken cabin on the edge of the big hole. There was also a little girl of 5 or 6 years old in the cabin. Wu Ming frowned a little. First, because his master was such a young child. Although he didn't know why he was contracted, it was too cruel to let such a young child participate in the Holy Grail War. Second, because Wu Ming saw that the little girl didn't have a smile on her face. No, it should be expressionless, like a puppet. I hope she's not a sacrifice of some magician family, Wu Ming thought to himself. At that moment, half of the cabin had been destroyed. Even if Wu Ming's clairvoyance skill was useless, Wu Ming knew that the cabin could collapse in an instant. At that moment, a little boy who looked to be about 11 or 12 years old ran over from the forest, but the little boy's mind seemed to be still immersed in the big hole in front of him that had a large piece dug out. Perhaps it was because of Wu Ming, the guy in strange clothes. The little boy quickly looked at Wu Ming. Gotcha, however, at that moment, the cabin seemed to have reached its limit. With a gotcha, it began to collapse. The little boy also saw the little girl in the cabin, but because he was focused on Wu Ming just now, the little boy didn't react in time. At that moment, the cabin had begun to collapse. Danger! The little boy yelled and ran to the cabin. But the little boy's speed was still too slow, and there was no time for him to run over. High-order transmission. At that moment, with a spell, Wu-Ming instantly appeared beside the little girl. The little girl seemed to have just reacted. She tilted her head and unconsciously opened her mouth as she stared blankly at Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming instantly picked up the little girl, chanted the spell again, and appeared in the same place. At that moment, the cabin completely collapsed, and the little boy who was running to the cabin also stopped. "Is this magic?" the little boy said with some surprise. Wu-Ming glanced at the little boy with a smile, then smiled at the little girl in his arms and said, "Are you okay, master?" The little girl looked at Wu-Ming with some doubts. She didn't seem to understand the word master. Then she shook her head and said, "Other than my mother, this is the first time someone hugged me." Wu-Ming smiled. Even if the little girl was a victim of the magician family, she was a pure child who was not contaminated by the magician. "So, how about this hug?" Wu-Ming asked the little girl with a gentle smile. The little girl grabbed Wu-Ming's clothes, rubbed it, and said after a while, "It's very warm." Wu-Ming's smile was even brighter, touched the little girl's head and said, "So, how about sleeping for a while?" Wu-Ming began to release his sacred aura. The little girl looked at Wu-Ming, nodded her head, lay in Wu-Ming's arms, and began to sleep. From the perspective of the little boy next to him, the big brother in front of him was exuding a faint golden halo, and the little boy was also affected by this halo. At this moment, he felt sleepy. Wu-Ming's caster-level skill, Sacred Aura A, was not simply the ability to bewitch people. He also had this similar effect to warm the atmosphere, make people sleepy, act as a heat source, dispel evil, repair, and other similar effects. At this moment, Wu-Ming was using the warm effect to make people sleepy, and the golden halo was because Wu-Ming didn't deliberately hide it. After all, the little boy in front of him knew magic, and he also saw a series of miraculous actions, so there was no need to hide it at all. For the sake of the little boy who knew how to help others, Wu-Ming had a good impression of him. At this moment, an uncle who was about 30 years old rushed to the little boy at an unimaginable speed, grabbed him, and then began to retreat at a speed that ordinary people couldn't reach. However, that was a speed that ordinary people couldn't reach. It was simply a joke for a servant, a heroic spirit's clone. In prison, Wu-Ming used a very common restriction magic in Yggdrasil. He easily froze the uncle's body. "Then, can you explain to me what's going on? This is Mr. Magician." Chapter 100. The man in his 30s in front of Wu-Ming swallowed his saliva and broke out in cold sweat. He understood what the creature in front of him was, and he also understood how destructive and unpredictable the creature in front of him was. Not to mention whether his origin bomb could affect it, but if it didn't, it would be troublesome. His own life was not important. What was important was the child in his hand, his adopted son. If something happened to him, he would not forgive himself. "So, sir, can you tell me where you are going with this child? I won't allow anyone to kidnap a child in front of me," Wu-Ming said gently. Wait, Kiritsugu is not a bad person." The little boy who was grabbed by Chiesi, who was already immobilized, said weakly. No matter what, the little boy also knew the existence of magic. For the situation that happened at this moment, the little boy was not very worried. After hearing the little boy's words, Wu-Ming instantly understood. The man who was immobilized by him should be with the little boy. The man should know the identity of Wu-Ming, or the creature called servant. "I see, then how many Holy Grail Wars is it now?" Wu-Ming said gently. "The 4th Holy Grail War, but it's over." The man looked at Wu-Ming cautiously and suspiciously. Wu-Ming also knew what he was wondering. The Holy Grail War was over, but his servant still existed, so he had to be cautious. "So that's how it is. I was too rash. I apologize to all of you here, Wu Ming said and lifted the immobilizing spell on the man. The man breathed a sigh of relief, then looked at Wu Ming and the little girl in his arms, and then took the little boy to the remaining house near the big hole. It seemed that he wanted to collect information. Wu Ming didn't care about the impolite man. Wu Ming pointed on the ground, and a simple house appeared there. Because Wu Ming had the power provided by Yggdrasil Baba, he could slightly control the wood element. The main purpose of building this house was to give his little master a place to rest for a short time. Wu Ming took out a piece of cloth and put it on the wooden bed as a sheet, then he settled his little master, took out another piece of cloth and covered her body. Then Wu Ming snapped his fingers, and a warm atmosphere filled the room. Wu Ming looked at the cup-shaped seal in his little master's hand and sighed. Wu Ming almost guessed that his little master's family probably died in this disaster. When Wu Ming came to the big hole, he released his magical power. After exploring, except for his little master and the father and son, there were no other humanoid lifeforms nearby. Wu Ming left the room and gently closed the door. Then Wu Ming gently jumped on the roof and sat down. Wu Ming knew that the father and son just now would definitely come to him again. Wu Ming didn't believe that the magician would come to this town that just suffered a disaster. In this way, Wu Ming began to meditate. Then, Wu Ming, Amiya Kiritsugu, and Shiro Amiya exchanged names. Then, Wu Ming learned about the situation of his master from Amiya Kiritsugu. Oh, godchild! Wu Ming thought. Amiya Kiritsugu and Shiro Amiya stood opposite Wu Ming. Yes, in order to protect the last orphan of the Shitsuki family, we want to protect her. Even if you are a servant and have been instilled with the knowledge of this era, you can't better protect her in human society. How about we cooperate? Amiya Kiritsugu looked at Wu Ming with a blank expression. Wu Ming laughed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you. For magicians, my master is a rare universal wishing machine. I really can't think of anyone who wants to protect her. Then, Wu Ming looked at Amiya Kiritsugu, who was still calm, and Shiro Amiya, who was looking at Amiya Kiritsugu with a worried face, and said, Well, then I accept your protection. I hope you don't let me lose hope, Amiya Kiritsugu-san. Wu Ming stretched out his hand and expressed a happy cooperation. Ah, happy working with you, Vumian. Chapter 101. Later, Wu Ming hugged the sleeping Shitsuki Meiyu and followed Amiya Kiritsugu and Shiro Amiya to Amiya Kiritsugu's residence in the city's winter wood. Late at night, a car stopped in front of a house. Wu Ming hugged the sleeping Meiyu and got out of the car. After Amiya Kiritsugu and Shiro Amiya got out of the car, Amiya Kiritsugu carried the few remaining books found in the Shitsuki family and told Shiro Amiya, Shiro, go and prepare a room for Mr. Wu Ming and Shitsuki Meiyu. Shitsuki Meiyu was the name written on the record found by Amiya Kiritsugu in the collapsed cabin. There was no doubt that it was the name of the little girl in Wu Ming's arms. I don't need it. Wu Ming stopped Shiro Amiya, who was about to prepare a room, and continued, Help me prepare a room for my little master. I don't need it. Shiro Amiya looked at Amiya Kiritsugu and then nodded. I understand. Then, I will go in first, Mr. Amiya. After that, regardless of Amiya Kiritsugu's opinion, he walked in with Meiyu in his arms. Amiya Kiritsugu didn't care about Wu Ming's behavior. In his opinion, servants were tools. He didn't need to be good to them. He just needed not to provoke them. Because the Amiya family had a lot of bedrooms, and the house was relatively empty, Shiro Amiya could move in after a simple cleaning. Wu Ming followed Shiro Amiya to a room. There was nothing on the clean tatami except for the quilt. Because I didn't know that someone was going to move in, there is no other furniture except for the quilt. Wu Ming looked at Shiro Amiya in front of him, who looked very restrained, and said with a smile, Thank you, and it's okay. You can go do your work. Wu Ming went into the room and closed the door. Wei Gongshi stared blankly at the closed door. Servants aren't as bad as Cut made them out to be. Wei Gong Shiro mumbled to himself as he left. Wu-Ming waved his hand, and the room was suddenly filled with a sacred feeling. Wu-Ming put Meiyu on the bed and covered Meiyu with a quilt. After casting a warm lune rune for Meiyu, Wu-Ming's spirit form disappeared. On the roof, Wu-Ming appeared and sat on the beam. He looked at Amiya Kuritsugu, who was moving books, and Shiro Amiya, who was helping Amiya Kuritsugu. Wu-Ming turned his gaze and looked at the bright moonlight in the sky. He began to organize the information he got. First, the contract between Wu-Ming and Meiyu was not initiated by Meiyu, but after the enchantment was destroyed, the people's desire to be saved was conveyed to Meiyu. It happened that Wu-Ming, a servant, was nearby, so Meiyu passively signed a contract with Wu-Ming. In fact, even if there was no contract, Wu-Ming would have erased the Black Storm mud. Not only because Wu-Ming promised Jem Wangzilik that he would do his best to save the world, but also because of Wu-Ming's own will. As a former human, Wu-Ming didn't want to see a disaster happen. If possible, Wu-Ming would still help humans. And Wu-Ming didn't play any word games. Whether it was to protect the world, or save the world, Wu-Ming would do it. Second, the Fourth Holy Grail War in this world ended not long ago. According to Amiya Kuritsugu, the Fourth Holy Grail War had ended almost 5 years ago. Amiya Kuritsugu was not a participant in the Fourth Holy Grail War, but Amiya Kuritsugu was a good friend of one of the masters. According to Amiya Kuritsugu, 2 of the 3 masters who held the Holy Grail War had died, including his good friend. At the end of the Fourth Holy Grail War, the Winter Wood, which was located at the place where the Holy Grail War was held, suffered a large-scale destruction. Shiro Amiya was Amiya Kuritsugu's adopted son in that war. Moreover, this world had been prophesied that humans would eventually be destroyed. Destruction, will it be because of this world? Is my little master the human who has many connections with the heroic spirits? Wu-Ming thought. After thinking for a moment, Wu-Ming shook his head, and his spirit form disappeared. Just like that, Wu-Ming's first night in this world passed. The next morning, before dawn, the people of Winterwood City were still asleep. Wu-Ming appeared in the courtyard in his spirit form and stretched. Sure enough, the body that is used to sleep is not adapted to the body in spirit form. That's right, Wu-Ming was not dead after all. He was a different kind of heroic spirit. In addition, Wu-Ming had lived a normal human life in France. In other words, every night, Wu-Ming would go to bed and sleep. Although Wu-Ming could not sleep as a servant, it was a bit difficult for a servant who was used to sleeping. Therefore, Wu-Ming directly removed his spirit form. Let's go and prepare Master's toiletries first. She probably hasn't woken up yet. With that, Wu-Ming walked out of the Amiya mansion. A moment later, Wu-Ming came back with a series of toiletries for young girls. Wu-Ming walked to the door of the room that Shiro Amiya prepared for Meiyu and stopped. It seems that children of this age can't take care of themselves. As he said that, Wu-Ming walked in another direction. A moment later, Wu-Ming came back with a basin of hot water and a wet towel. Knock knock. Wu-Ming knocked on the door, then pushed the door open and walked in. In this room full of sacred atmosphere, Meiyu sat on the bed, the lower half of her body covered with a quilt. Because Meiyu fell asleep after meeting Wu-Ming, Meiyu's clothes were still the same as before. It was a gorgeous dress similar to a witch's costume, and Meiyu had a flower-shaped hair ornament on her head. Masked. Looking at that expressionless face and cold red eyes, Wu-Ming felt a tinge of heartache. Meiyu, why are you awake so early? With that, Wu-Ming walked slowly to Meiyu's side, squatted down, put the things in his hands aside, and looked at Meiyu. Children shouldn't wake up so early, you need to sleep well. Wu-Ming patted Meiyu's head. Meiyu's face showed a hint of confusion, as if she was wondering why he patted her head. I couldn't sleep, so I woke up, Meiyu said after a while. Wu-Ming smiled sweetly at Meiyu. Is that so? Then let's wash up. Then, with Wu-Ming's help, Meiyu successfully finished washing up. Then, Wu Ming brought Meiyu to the edge outside. Meiyu, sit here for a while, I'll prepare food for you. Meiyu looked at the edge made of wooden planks, then looked at Wu Ming and nodded. Meiyu hugged a cloth ball and sat down steadily. Wu Ming then started to go to the Amiya family's kitchen. But at this moment, Wu Ming stopped and looked back at Meiyu. Wu Ming found that Meiyu was just sitting there in a daze. Wu Ming frowned, and then a loon rune appeared in the air, and a few cute little fairies appeared beside Wu Ming. This was a loon magic to summon a familiar. Then, the little fairies flew to Meiyu's side. Meiyu looked at the little fairies in surprise, then looked at Wu Ming. In response, Wu Ming only smiled. Then, he left the room and went to the kitchen. Seeing Wu Ming's back disappear around the corner, Meiyu turned her gaze and looked curiously at the cute little fairies, and the corner of her mouth curved up slightly. Chapter 102. Well then, let me see what ingredients the Amiya family has. After that, Wu Ming didn't find anything. After all, it was a place where he didn't come often, so it was easy for the ingredients to go bad. After that, Wu Ming didn't say anything and directly used the space door and walked in. After a while, Wu Ming came out with a series of ingredients. As for how to pay, Wu Ming said that he had some gold coins in his Draconis that weren't very useful. Just as Wu Ming was preparing food in the kitchen, Shiro Amiya walked in with a yawn. Hey, Mr. Wu Ming. Shiro seemed to be at a loss at the moment. He really didn't expect that the legendary heroic spirit would actually cook in person. Are you scared by me, Shiro Amiya? Wu Ming didn't turn his head and said in a gentle tone. No. I didn't expect Mr. Wu Ming to cook in person. Shiro Amiya said with some embarrassment. Wu Ming put the cooked food on the plate and said, Don't look at me like this, I'm also a teacher, and teachers are omnipotent. I see, is Mr. Wu Ming a teacher? Who did Mr. Wu Ming teach? Shiro Amiya asked curiously. Wu Ming turned his head and looked at Shiro Amiya. And Shiro Amiya seemed to be aware of his own behavior. Inquiring about heroic spirits was equivalent to inquiring about their weaknesses. For those who became heroic spirits, their own death was sublimated by the legends and thus became a weakness. Just like Wu Ming's previous saber class, Wu Ming might instantly return to the heroic spirit palace if he used a fire magic spell that was large enough to destroy a servant. Of course, to Wu Ming, this was just a respawn point. But Wu Ming was a caster at the moment, so Hyunryong wasn't dead, but Hyunryong wasn't needed anymore. Perhaps only a weapon that contained a large amount of human power would be able to harm Wu Ming. I'm the great sage who taught the Hero King, Wu Ming joked as he walked towards the door with a plate of food. Before he left, he added, By the way, I left some ingredients for you and Mr. Amiya. You can use them directly. Shiro Amiya looked at Wu Ming's back as he left, and then looked at the ingredients on the stove. Mr. Wu Ming is not as difficult to get along with as Kiritsugu said. With that, Shiro Amiya began to prepare breakfast. On the other side, Wu Ming came to the edge and saw Meiyu, who was sitting on the edge and playing with the elf. It was rare for Meiyu to have a smile on her face. Meiyu! Wu Ming shouted at Meiyu. Meiyu turned her head and looked at him with a puzzled face, and the smile on her face was gone. Sure enough, it will take a while for Meiyu to grow into a normal child. Meiyu, come and taste the food I made. Wu Ming put a plate of exquisite food in front of Meiyu. It was a plate of golden omelette rice. As a person who doesn't cook, it was basically impossible to make such a plate of omelette rice, whether it was color or fragrance. However, this was a world full of mysteries. Well, Wu Ming used magic and added his own sacred aura to this plate of omelette rice, so it looked like it was glowing. Looking at Meiyu looking at the plate of omelette rice but not eating, Wu Ming sighed. Do you need me to feed you? Wu Ming asked gently. Meiyu thought for a moment and nodded. Wu Ming smiled helplessly and then picked up the plate of omelette rice. Wu Ming picked up the spoon and cut a hole in the egg skin of the omelette rice. The rice inside the egg skin instantly broke out, showing the golden rice grains. The rice grains were mixed with ham and vegetables, showing a different kind of beauty. Mayu looked at this scene, her eyes slightly widened. It can't be helped. Who told this guy to deliberately use magic as an auxiliary means to make it? Wuming scooped up a small spoonful of golden rice with meat and vegetables, gently blew on it, and handed it to Mayu. Mayu looked at Wuming, then looked at the spoon in front of her, and finally gently opened her mouth and ate the spoonful of rice. The moment the rice entered her mouth, Wuming could see some ripples in Mayu's eyes. Wuming smiled. Mayu slowly chewed the food in her mouth, and Wuming patiently waited. After a moment, Mayu swallowed the food in her mouth and said, "Delicious." Looking at Mayu's, "I still want to eat" expression, Wuming's smile became more brilliant. "Eat more if it's delicious." Okay. Just like this, Wuming slowly fed Mayu the omelette rice spoon by spoon, and Mayu ate the food on the spoon that Wuming handed over. This meal took about half an hour. As for whether the omelette rice would get cold, Wuming said that the rice blessed by his skill would not get cold. Finally, Wuming put down the plate and spoon in his hand, and looked at Mayu, who was still savoring the aftertaste. Coincidentally, there was a grain of rice hanging on the corner of Mayu's mouth. Wuming reached out to remove the grain of rice, but just as Wuming used a finger to pick up the rice, Mayu opened her mouth and ate the grain of rice. Wuming smiled awkwardly, because, at this moment, his finger was still in Mayu's mouth. After pulling his finger out of Mayu's mouth, Wuming awkwardly looked at the finger that was covered with Mayu's saliva. "Wash it off? Isn't that disdaining Mayu for being dirty? Don't wash it off? Then why do I keep this finger covered with saliva?" At this moment, Shiro Amiya came out from the corner. "Mr. Wuming, I prepared some miso soup for you and Shiryu." Shiro Amiya put 2 bowls of soup in front of Wuming and Mayu. "Thank you very much," Wuming politely said, and then began to drink. Mayu looked at Wuming pick up the miso soup, and also picked it up. After Wuming finished drinking, he put down the bowl and commented, "Not bad, you really are a good seedling to be the court's husband." Shiro Amiya smiled awkwardly. After all, it was a joke, not a serious one. "It's not as good as the previous egg dumpling rice," Mayu suddenly said. Is that so? I'm sorry, I'll work harder next time." Shiro Amiya was a little embarrassed. After the 2 finished drinking, Shiro Amiya packed up the cutlery including Wuming's egg dumpling rice and left. "You can't be so rude, Mayu," Wuming taught Mayu. "But, it's really not as good as the egg dumpling rice." Mayu tilted her head and said innocently. Wuming was a little helpless. He knew that Mayu now lacked the emotions of a normal human. This kind of situation could not be solved by magic. It was better to let nature take its course. Wuming patted Mayu's head and said, "You're right, but you still have a lot to learn. Remember not to define something too early." "I know, big brother." Mayu nodded. At this time, Wuming just remembered that he did not tell Mayu his name. After all, the 2 just met last night, after which Mayu fell asleep, and did not wake up until this morning. At this moment, Mayu, who did not cry or make a fuss, was considered very good among her peers. "I'm sorry, it's my negligence not to tell you my name. My name is Wuming." "Wuming. My name is Shitsuki Mayu." Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you." "Nice trip." Chapter 103. After breakfast, Wuming was going to take Mayu out to buy some clothes. At the door, Amiya Kuritsugu came out of the house. "Where are you going to take it?" This seemed to be a very plain sentence, but Wuming heard another meaning. It was as if Wuming wanted to take away Amiya Kuritsugu's water bag in the desert. "I'm going to take my master to buy some clothes. Mr. Amiya, are you interested in coming together?" Wuming said with a gentle smile. For some reason, Wuming always smiled when he was Hyunryong. Wuming would fake a smile to those who didn't need it, but Wuming would smile from the bottom of his heart to those who needed it. Amiya Kiritsugu didn't speak. After a while, he said, "Can you let Shiro go with us? Shiro hasn't bought new clothes for a long time." Wuming didn't make any objection to this, but looked deeply at Amiya Kiritsugu. Then Wuming said, "Of course, I like children very much." A moment later, Shiro Amiya was called out by Amiya Kiritsugu. "Shiro, you follow them. Buy whatever clothes you want. You haven't bought new clothes for a long time." Amiya Kiritsugu said and handed some money to Shiro Amiya. Shiro Amiya took the money and followed Wuming and Meiyu. After all, Wei Gongshi was wearing a new set of clothes that he had just bought. After Wuming left with Shitsuki Meiyu and Shiro Amiya, Amiya Kiritsugu lit a cigarette. Amiya Kiritsugu exhaled a long smoke. Hero King. Hyunryong. Amiya Kiritsugu couldn't help but think of the words Shiro Amiya said when he sent him food. Mr. Wuming just said that he is the Hero King's teacher. Kiritsugu, do you know the Hero King? Amiya Kiritsugu quickly finished a cigarette. If it's really you, then it's really bad. After all, in the mythology, the reason why Hyunryong came to Uruk to teach the Hero King was because Hyunryong liked humans very much. And Wuming to Shitsuki Meiyu, who was a human and his master, would not allow Amiya Kiritsugu's wish. Suddenly, Amiya Kiritsugu knelt on the ground, covered his mouth with his hand, and coughed a few times. A few drops of red blood dripped to the ground. "Is it time, then?" Amiya Kiritsugu stood up and went back to the house. Wuming held Meiyu's hand, followed by Shiro Amiya. Looking at the scene that she had never seen before, Meiyu opened her eyes curiously. Wuming specially studied the magic barrier of the Shitsuki family for Meiyu. That is, to prevent the wishes of the world from reaching Meiyu's ears and causing pollution to Meiyu. Because he was a caster, Wuming's ability to analyze magic and other things was still very strong. However, Wuming did not analyze the barrier by himself, but used the gift given by Zelik. "Master, after testing, the magic barrier around Miss Meiyu is working well at the moment, and it is comparable to the magic barrier of the Shitsuki family." "Thank you for your hard work, Kalas. You are too serious, Master. This is my pleasure." Wuming was wearing a translucent golden-green crown similar to a dragon's horn on his head at the moment. This crown was the high-level magic headwear that Zelik made for Wuming with the second method, golden-green stone. Wuming couldn't help but recall that moment. After Wuming came to this world, he couldn't wait to use this magic dress. In the forest, after Wuming activated golden-green stone, the original ordinary ring turned into a golden-green crown similar to a dragon's horn, floating in front of Wuming. "Nice to meet you, Master. I am your special magic dress, golden-green stone, Kalas Ballet." Listening to this emotionless female voice, Wuming felt a little uncomfortable. After all, Wuming hoped that the artificial elf in his magic dress could be more lively. After all, Wuming didn't think of using it as a prop, but as a partner. "Nice to meet you. Can I call you Kalas?" Wuming walked and asked the dragon's horn floating in the air. "This is your right, Master." Wuming stopped and looked at golden-green stone. "Listen to me, Kalas. You can call me Master, but don't think of me as your master." Golden-green dragon's horn stopped floating in the air, as if it was waiting for Wuming's next sentence. "We are partners who will live and die together. Remember, I am not an ordinary servant. I am a heroic spirit who has not died." After that, Wuming began to walk again. Golden-green dragon's horn was silent for a moment and then followed Wuming's pace. Then, it tightly wrapped around Wuming's head. Wuming touched the dragon's horn and smiled. Then Wuming used concealment magic to temporarily hide it. Feeling someone pulling his hand, Wuming came back to his senses and looked at Meiyu beside him. "What's wrong, Meiyu?" Wuming asked Meiyu. Meiyu pointed in a direction and said, "That one." Wuming looked at the direction Meiyu pointed. A restaurant with an omelette appeared in front of Wuming's eyes. Wuming instantly knew what Meiyu was thinking. Wuming smiled happily, then squatted down and said, "Have you just eaten, you little greedy cat?" Then, he scratched Mayo's nose with his finger. Mayu was a little panicked. She covered her little nose and looked at Wu Ming blankly. Looking at such a cute Mayu, Wu Ming smiled even more brightly. Let's come here after we buy clothes, okay? Wu Ming asked softly. Okay. Mayu nodded and then grabbed Wu Ming's hand again. Wu Ming stood up and looked at Shiro Amiya behind him. Amiya, come later, it's my treat. Shiro Amiya looked at Wu Ming with some surprise, then asked weakly. How did Mr. Wu Ming pay? Shiro Amiya just remembered that Wu Ming, as a follower, had no money, so how did he buy those ingredients? The money Kiritsugu gave was not enough to buy clothes and food. Ha ha! Wu Ming laughed twice, then said, I'm the teacher of the Hero King, who has all the treasures in the world. The tuition is enough for me to eat and drink. So that's how it is, then Mr. Wu Ming is very rich. Ha ha, of course. In this way, the three of them went farther and farther away. However, Shiro Amiya did not notice a problem. Everything that came with a servant was made of magic, but Wu Ming's items could be left in the modern world. This was also because Shiro Amiya did not understand the servants and did not understand the Holy Grail War, so Wu Ming exposed his information. Even if he wanted to tell Amiya Kiritsugu, it was fine. Wu Ming had already seen that Amiya Kiritsugu's vitality was almost gone. Chapter 104. Wu Ming brought Mayu and Shiro Amiya out of the department store. The three of them did not have anything in their hands as they were all kept by Wu Ming in his Draconist relic. Wu Ming brought Mayu and Shiro Amiya to the restaurant that they came across earlier. After ordering a portion of omelette each for Mayu and Shiro Amiya, Wu Ming brought the two of them to a seat. After a while, the waiter served the omelette. Due to Wu Ming's actions, Shiro Amiya was not reserved around Wu Ming. He picked up the spoon and said, I'm going to eat. Then, he began to enjoy the meal. On the other hand, Mayu kept looking at Wu Ming as if to say, Why aren't you feeding me yet? Wu Ming smiled and shook his head helplessly. Then, he said, remember to eat by yourself in the future. Don't always let others feed you. Okay. Mayu nodded and looked at Wu Ming with anticipation. Then, Wu Ming picked up the plate of omelette, picked up the spoon, and cut open the egg. Then, he began to feed her just like how he fed Mayu this morning. Shiro Amiya looked at the heartwarming scene with jealousy in his eyes. When will you be able to feed me the cub? Shiro Amiya seemed to have realized something and shook his head frantically. No, I'm going to be a righteous man. How can I let others feed me? With that thought, he seemed to be motivated and began to eat in big mouthfuls. After Shiro Amiya finished eating, Wu Ming only fed her half of the omelette. Then, under Shiro Amiya's gaze, Wu Ming finished feeding her. Wu Ming picked up a tissue and wiped the corner of Mayu's mouth. Then, he said, Okay, let's go. Okay, Mayu said calmly. Then, she added, this omelette isn't good. It's not as good as yours. Wu Ming looked at Mayu who wanted to say something. But, it's very warm. Wu Ming was silent. As a human who could grow up normally, Wu Ming could not imagine what Mayu, who was almost 6 years old, had experienced in the past 6 years. She was only allowed to see her mother and live in that small house. She was not allowed to read books or understand the outside world. She was not allowed to have feelings for anyone. She was not allowed to do anything. Although this was for the good of Mayu and the other divine children, it was still a little too cruel. After a while, Wu Ming picked up Mayu. Mayu, maybe you don't understand now, but you have to remember that your name is Mayu. You are no longer Shoyu. You don't need to bear any responsibility of the Shitsuki family anymore. Because I am here. After saying this, Wu Ming's aura suddenly changed, as if a god had descended. Mayu, who was picked up by Wu Ming, opened her big red eyes and looked at Wu Ming. At this moment, Mayu's eyes were slightly moist. Moreover, Mayu seemed to feel the feelings conveyed by Wu Ming. Then, Mayu lay in Wu Ming's arms, closed her eyes, and fell asleep. Before Mayu fell asleep, Wu Ming vaguely heard a sentence, "Thank you." Wu Ming suppressed his aura, and then Wu Ming cast a mute magic on Mayu, and said to Shiro Amiya, "Let's go, Shiro Amiya." "Yes, yes." Shiro Amiya looked at Wu Ming with some surprise. Now, Shiro Amiya knew why his adoptive father, Amiya Kiritsugu, was so afraid of followers. Soon, Wu Ming carried the sleeping Mayu, followed by Shiro Amiya, and the three people returned to the Amiya mansion. After Wu Ming settled Mayu, he followed Shiro Amiya to see Amiya Kiritsugu. "As long as I am here, Mayu will not become the Great Holy Grail." After leaving this sentence, Wu Ming left. Shiro Amiya looked at the gloomy face of Amiya Kiritsugu, and didn't know what to do. Amiya Kiritsugu's face was gloomy. He should have thought that if it was really that Hyunryong, whether it was out of love for humans, or because Mayu was his master, Wu Ming would protect Mayu. Then, Amiya Kiritsugu spat out a mouthful of blood, and sat on the ground. "Kiritsugu!" Shiro Amiya quickly ran to Amiya Kiritsugu's side, and helped him up. At this moment, Amiya Kiritsugu's face was even more aged. "Hey, Dad. What's wrong with you?" Shiro Amiya said anxiously. Amiya Kiritsugu shook his head. He knew that his body couldn't take it anymore. He spat out blood because he had finally found a way to save the world, but he was stopped by an invincible person. "Shiro, you must remember our wish." Shiro Amiya looked at the current Amiya Kiritsugu and nodded heavily. On the other side, Wu Ming returned to Mayu's room. Looking at the still sleeping Mayu, Wu Ming smiled with relief. Wu Ming was now even more convinced of what he had said. "I'm here. I will definitely protect you, Mayu." As if hearing Wu Ming's voice, Mayu slowly opened her eyes. Then, Mayu got up in an instant and threw herself into Wu Ming's arms, just like a newborn bird throwing itself into its parents' arms. Wu Ming hugged Mayu, and then Wu Ming found that Mayu's eyes had turned golden at this moment. Just like himself, Wu Ming's hair and eyes turned golden because of the high-density divinity brought by his caster rank Hyunryong. Mayu's original eyes were undoubtedly red, but at this moment, they became the same as Wu Ming's. Is it the Holy Grail's ability to grant wishes? Wu Ming thought of Mayu as the Holy Grail, who had the ability to passively grant other people's wishes before the age of 7. Although Wu Ming had used the emerald to simulate the Shitsuki family's magic barrier, someone as strong as Wu Ming could still penetrate the magic barrier and convey wishes to Mayu at a very close distance. It turned out to be the case. Is this the reason why I said I'm here? After all, the Holy Grail was not omnipotent. It could only choose the most appropriate way to grant wishes at present. Perhaps for the judgment of the Holy Grail system, for Mayu, letting Mayu become Wu Ming's family and be protected by Wu Ming was the most ideal idea of no need to bear the responsibility of the Shitsuki family. No wonder Mayu was so tired that she fell asleep. It turned out that the Holy Grail played a role in fulfilling Wu Ming's wish, which led to Mayu's exhaustion. Well, this is not bad. Then, you are my sister. Please take care of me, Mayu. With that, Wu Ming put one of his hands that was holding Mayu on Mayu's head and touched it. Well, please take care of me, brother. In this way, the person who Shitsuki Mayu died, the so-called Mayu who was Wu Ming's sister was born, and a new life began. Chapter 105. In the afternoon, a golden-haired, golden-eyed young man walked on the streets of Winterwood City with a smile on his face. Some of the more powerful people in Winterwood City looked at Wu Ming with shock and relief when they saw Wu Ming. From time to time, he would stop at a gourmet shop to buy some delicious food. In the end, the young man would always visit the food market. When he walked to a familiar shop, the young man had just reached the door when an uncle who was the store manager walked out and shouted, "Yo, Amiya, you're here to sell food again. Wu-ming looked at the store manager who greeted him and smiled. Yes, I have to make my cute sister's favorite omelette rice. As expected, the meat in your shop is still the freshest. The uncle laughed. Ha ha, of course. I've been running this shop in Winterwood City for more than 10 years. The freshness of the meat is one of the best. At this time, the store manager of the next shop suddenly appeared. Humph. If you want to talk about the quality of the ingredients, you have to look for my shop. Although the meat in my shop is slightly inferior, the vegetables in my shop are the freshest in Winterwood City. You old man. Are you trying to make trouble for me? You're the one who's trying to make trouble for Brother Amiya. It's obvious that Brother Amiya wants to cook for his beloved sister. You actually sold your stale vegetables to Brother Amiya while I was busy and closed the shop. I think you're provoking me. Looking at the two quarrelsome store managers who looked like they were about to fight, Wu-ming felt helpless. The two of you have a good relationship, Wu-ming said gently. The two uncles had taken root here ever since Wu-ming bought food here. Although they looked like they were in conflict, they were actually quarrelsome. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put their shops together to do business. Hearing Wu-ming's words, the two uncles snorted and then took out the ingredients that they had prepared. Amiya, this is the best meat that I've carefully selected. I'll sell it to you at the same price as before. Brother Amiya, these are the vegetables that I personally picked. I'm selling them to you at the same price as before. Wu-ming smiled helplessly, paid the bill, thanked him, and left. Then, the two uncles began to discuss. Brother Amiya is such a good returnee. Why does he always buy ingredients personally? Another uncle said, It's obvious that you're ignorant. Amiya dotes on his sister a lot. Every time he cooks for his sister, he buys the ingredients himself. That's true. Otherwise, with Brother Amiya's family business, he wouldn't need to run errands himself. That's great. I wonder if he'll take a fancy to my daughter. Forget about it. I think my niece is better. It was another round of shoulder to shoulder, as if they were about to fight. Wu-ming, who hadn't gone far, listened to the conversation between the two uncles' store managers and felt helpless. At this time, Wu-ming had been in this world for almost 5 years. 5 years ago, Wu-ming used magic to hypnotize various high-level officials and underworld leaders in Winterwood City, making them all think that Wu-ming was a very powerful senior who had returned from overseas. He also used magic to hypnotize the director of a large company with an address in Winterwood. Then, Wu-ming put his name in this company. After that, he took out the few remaining treasures in his Draconist and exchanged them for a large amount of currency. After all, when he was in Nasarick, Wu-ming took out most of his treasures to supply Nasarick. Since then, Wu-ming's treasures had shrunk significantly. At this time, Wu-ming's Draconist had no treasures except for some necessary props. Also, after Wu-ming and Meiyu came to Amiya family, Amiya Kiritsugu passed away not long after, as if he had fallen asleep. Wu-ming didn't plan to help Amiya Kiritsugu with his treatment, and Amiya Kiritsugu didn't plan to let Shiro Amiya or himself ask Wu-ming for help. That man already had a trace of death. No, it should be said that he died long ago. If there was no Shiro Amiya, then the only thing left was a walking corpse acting in order to save the world. Wu-ming adopted Shiro Amiya and Amiya Meiyu as Amiya Kiritsugu's distant relative from abroad. That's right, at this time, Wu-ming's name was Wu-ming Amiya. Although it wasn't much, the name was always fake, so there was no need to pay attention to it. Wu-ming returned to the gorgeous Amiya mansion, put down the ingredients, and prepared to pick up Meiyu, who was about to finish school. Meiyu was taught the basics by Wu-ming, and then waited for about a year. After all, the secret of the Shutsuki family attracted many magicians. When Meiyu was in primary school, at this time, Meiyu was 10 years old and was in primary school, while Shiro Amiya was 17 years old and was in high school. Shiro Amiya gradually became stronger after Amiya Kiritsugu passed away, just like how he always refused Wu-ming's pick-up and drop-off. Wuming still remembered the words of the 12-year-old Shiro Amiya. I'm already 12 years old. I've grown up. I don't need Big Brother to pick me up. Because Wuming adopted Shiro Amiya and Amiya Mayu as a distant relative of the Amiya family, both of them called him Big Brother. Mayu didn't want to be outdone, and seemed to want to go to school alone. In the end, Wuming resolutely refused. What a joke, Mayu was only 6 years old at that time. There was still about a year before the characteristics of the Shutsuki family godchild disappeared. It was inevitable that there would be magicians who knew about the Shutsuki family's godchild. Amiya Kuritsugu was suspicious because the Shutsuki family deliberately hid girls under 7 years old. There would definitely be magicians who suspected or even knew about the Shutsuki family's godchild. As for Mayu's golden pupils, Wuming used a special kind of magic, similar to contact lenses, to turn Mayu's golden pupils into a special color between orange and pale gold. For the time being, he called it orange gold. Wuming also changed his pupils to orange gold. Together with Shiro Amiya's orange-yellow pupils, they looked like a family. Wuming locked the door and headed towards Mayu's primary school, Suechuanhara Academy. To be precise, it was the primary school of Suechuanhara Academy. Because Wuming was worried about Mayu, Wuming gradually quickened his pace. He arrived at Suechuanhara Academy. Suechuanhara Academy had a high school section and a primary school section. Wuming calculated the time. Shiro Amiya, who was in the high school section, and Mayu, who was in the primary school section, were almost finished with school. However, Wuming still walked to the entrance of the primary school section. Next to the high school section of Suechuanhara Academy, there was another school, which was the primary school of Suechuanhara Academy. After waiting for a moment, the school bell rang. Slowly, people began to walk out of the school. These were all returning home, including Mayu and Shiro. After a moment, Wuming saw a petite figure in the crowd. Mayu! Wuming shouted at Mayu with a smile. Brother! Mayu trotted and sped up, throwing herself into Wuming's arms. Chapter 106. Wuming crouched down and hugged Mayu, who was running towards him. He stroked Mayu's head and said, "How was it? Did you listen to the teacher and wait for me in school?" "Yes, I was very obedient today. Also, I made a new friend today." Mayu looked at Wuming with her big eyes and said cheerfully, "A friend? What kind of friend?" Wuming was a little happy. Mayu had been in this school for almost 4 years. Wuming still remembered that at the beginning, many people thought that Mayu was a strange child, and no one was willing to be friends with her. After all, Mayu had just developed feelings for him. It was no wonder that people would say that about Mayu. At that time, Mayu didn't care much about it. Wuming once asked Mayu why she wanted to go to school. According to Mayu, going to school was something that Wuming wanted. Mayu would do what Wuming wanted her to do. This made Wuming very helpless at that time. This couldn't be blamed on Mayu. When she had just developed feelings for him, other than Wuming, even Shiro Amiya, who she saw every day, couldn't attract Mayu's attention. Mayu only cared about Wuming. At that time, Wuming followed Mayu almost every day in spirit form. Firstly, it was to protect Mayu. Secondly, it was to pay attention to Mayu's behavior in school. Wuming wanted to slowly guide Mayu according to her interests in school. In the end, Wuming discovered that Mayu's interests could be said to be 0, or it could be said to be all. Mayu was very interested in this world that she didn't see before. Especially under Wuming's guidance, Mayu developed feelings for him. However, Mayu wasn't interested in anything in particular. Moreover, Wuming was called to the office more than once by the head teacher because of Mayu's lack of feelings in school. Wuming had no choice but to use the reason that Mayu had been in a car accident and suffered severe brain damage to dispel the doubts of the teachers. Fortunately, around 2 years ago, Mayu's feelings at that time had almost completely recovered. Other than her cold voice and introverted personality, she was basically the same as an ordinary person. From then on, Mayu began to gradually make friends. Every time Mayu made a friend, she would confide in him. Wuming would also listen patiently and ask Mayu from time to time. It was the same this time. "She's behind. Let me introduce her to you," Mayu asked with a red face. "And I also want to meet Mayu's new friend." Wuming looked in the direction that Mayu pointed. A little girl with golden curly hair in a ponytail was hiding in a corner. Her small head was poking out to look at Wuming and Mayu. "Erica, over here." Mayu waved at the little girl with golden curly hair in a ponytail. The little girl named Erica heard Mayu's call and walked over awkwardly. "Brother, this is Erica Ainsworth," Mayu said to Wuming. Wuming looked at Erica with an expressionless face. Erica also looked at Wuming with a strange smile. "Is that so? You're Erica. I'm Mayu's brother. My name is Amiya Wuming. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you." However, after Erica finished speaking, her mouth changed as if she said something, but Mayu didn't see it. Wuming's expression didn't change. He said to Mayu, "We have something to do today. I'm really sorry. Erica, we'll leave first." With that, Wuming pulled Mayu out of the Suechuan primary school. Erica didn't move from her spot. A moment later, a teenager wearing the Suechuan primary school uniform came over. "Erica, are you sure it's him?" Is that so? Then let's go." With that, the teenager left with Erica. Wuming held Mayu's hand and walked on the road. Mayu asked with some concern, "Brother, what's wrong? Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" Wuming held Mayu's hand and said while walking, "Mayu, when did you meet that Erica?" Although Mayu was puzzled, she still told Wuming the information about Erica. "When I was eating lunch this afternoon, Erica suddenly ran to me and said that she admired me and wanted to be friends with me. The strange thing is, I've never seen Erica in school. Maybe she's a new student." Wuming was relieved. This new year, Wuming felt more than once that someone was watching him, and there were more than once magicians who attacked the Amiya mansion. Although these people were dealt with by Wuming, but every time they were dealt with, the magician would turn into a puppet. With Wuming's eyes, he could naturally see that this was the most basic magic of magicians, replacement magic. This was a high-level method of replacing a person's personality with a puppet. The only one who could use this kind of magic was one of the three families of the Yu family, the House of Einstein Barons. Wuming didn't know whether the other party was Einstein Barons or not, and didn't know why the other party didn't take the initiative to come, but this didn't affect Wuming's fear. Wuming secretly gave Mayu the Emerald Stone in order to prevent Mayu from being harmed during school, and also set up a large number of teleportation magic on Mayu. If there were any accidents, Wuming would be able to teleport over in an instant. Moreover, in the past 5 years, Wuming had transformed the Emerald Stone into a noble relic. Emerald Stone, Colossus Beryl, Chrysoberyl, level, C+ type, human noble relic distance, 0.50 maximum capture, 100 people. It was a magic attire specially made by the second mage, Keshua Zelrich Subian Augustus. It was a magic attire with artificial spirit. Normally, it would be used as a head ornament, but it could borrow the magic of a parallel world to perform detection, scanning, analysis, simulation, disguise, transformation, warning, defense, and a series of other types of high-level magic attire. After becoming a noble artifact, its performance became even more perfect. However, because it was a magic attire, its level could only reach C rank. Colossus's intelligence was quite high. Wuming asked Colossus to take care of Mayu. After much reluctance, Colossus followed Wuming's arrangement and hid on Mayu's body, becoming an accessory on her school bag. As for the Erica he met today, Wuming could feel that she was a living god-level character. At that time, the words Erica mouthed were Hyun Ryong. This made Wuming shocked. This meant that the other party already knew his identity. Looking at how fearless she was, she probably had a way to deal with him. Wu Ming was puzzled as to how he was exposed. Since then, after knowing that there was a hidden enemy, Shiro Amiya's memory of him had been erased by Wu Ming. Of course, this was under the condition that Shiro Amiya was willing to do it. Meiyu, our peaceful days are coming to an end. Meiyu was stunned. Wu Ming could feel that Meiyu's hand was trembling. Do you mean that I'm going to be separated from brother? Meiyu said to Wu Ming with a gloomy face. Of course not. I said that as long as I'm here, you don't have to bear the responsibility of the Shitsuki family. Wu Ming looked at Meiyu seriously. Meiyu nodded seriously. Then, the two of them walked towards the Amiya mansion. Chapter 107. After returning home, Wu Ming activated his magic workshop in the Amiya mansion. The golden staff of the 7 snakes floated in the middle of the magic workshop. The entire Amiya mansion had been completely transformed by Wu Ming into his own temple, the Hyunryong Temple of Worship. Shiro Amiya had also returned to the Amiya mansion. As soon as he entered the door, Shiro Amiya shouted, "Brother, Meiyu!" Wu Ming appeared and looked at Shiro Amiya. "What do you know, Shiro?" Wu Ming asked. Shiro Amiya gave the letter he received in school to Wu Ming. Wu Ming opened it. "Dear Hyunryong, your concealment methods are indeed brilliant, making the House of Einstein Barons search for nearly 5 years before we found the Holy Grail container. Next, the House of Einstein Barons will start the Holy Grail War, in order to fight for the Great Holy Grail. Shitsuki Meiyu, please look forward to it." Wu Ming finished reading the letter and looked at Shiro Amiya. "Shiro, who gave you this letter?" Shiro Amiya was a little embarrassed, but he still said, "It was my good friend in school, Yalinshu, who gave it to me." Wu Ming finally understood why Shiro Amiya was so unbearable. A good friend who had been with him for a few years suddenly turned against him. This made Shiro Amiya, who was not a magician, feel a little overwhelmed. It seems that Yalinshu is a fake name. The other party is very likely from the House of Einstein Barons. Big brother, are you talking about the destroyed Einsbalen, one of the 3 Yu families? Because of Wu Ming's teaching from time to time, Shiro Amiya could be regarded as a first-class magician at this moment. However, Shiro Amiya was talented in swordsmanship and projection magic. According to Wu Ming's suggestion, Shiro Amiya could practice projection magic more. Any basic magic should not be ignored, just like the House of Einstein Barons replacement magic. Wu Ming often used advanced item creation to create some items or weapons he had seen before for Shiro Amiya to analyze their composition and practice projection magic. Also, Wu Ming taught Shiro Amiya basic swordsmanship, but he did not teach him anything else. In Wu Ming's view, Shiro Amiya's talent in swordsmanship was far above projection magic. Wu Ming could only guide his path, not teach him. Shiro Amiya was a little sad, then said, "What the hell is going on? Didn't Meiyu's ability disappear? Why did the Holy Grail War happen, brother?" Because of Wu Ming, Shiro Amiya understood the rules and requirements of the Holy Grail War very early. "This is the fate of the Shitsuki family," Wu Ming said seriously. Wu Ming once visited the Holy Church in Winterwood City. A priest named Yen Fengili confessed everything to Wu Ming. The godchild of the Shitsuki family was artificially created 400 years ago for the purpose of the Holy Grail War. The godchild of the Shitsuki family was used as a vessel to create the Holy Grail War. By sacrificing the souls of the servants, the Holy Grail War was created. In the Fourth Holy Grail War, 2 of the 3 families who organized the Holy Grail War were killed, and the remaining family also suffered a great loss. They might not even be able to maintain their status in the magic world, so the Holy Grail War was never held again. The Holy Grail War was to use cards with the servants' power to turn the masters into servants. 7 servants would fight each other, and the wish would be fulfilled on the last day. This is a war sooner or later. I'm going to the clock tower in England. You and Mayu stay here. Don't go anywhere. Don't leave this house. This is already my magic workshop. Even assassin can't sneak in, and berserker can't come in. I know. I'll participate in the Holy Grail War and protect Mayu. Shiro Amiya said solemnly. Wuming flicked Shiro's head. Let's not talk about whether you have a card or not. I'm here. You don't need to worry about the Holy Grail War. Shiro Amiya covered his forehead with a pained expression. Wuming thought for a moment and took out some defensive items from his Draconist. He told Shiro Amiya how to use it, and Wuming created a celestial lock. This is a celestial lock. Look at the other party's fearless face. I'm afraid that the other party has a divine servant. Take it first, just in case you need it. I know, brother. Shiro Amiya took the celestial lock with a serious face. Wuming looked at Mayu, who had been hiding in the corner from the beginning, and instantly came behind her. Mayu. Ah dash. Mayu was obviously shocked, and looked at Wuming with resentment. Woo. Brother Wuming, looking at Mayu, who was embarrassed because she was caught eavesdropping, Wuming smiled. I know you have the ability to bear all this, so I told you about the magic world from the beginning. But I don't want you to learn magic. I also know that you're working hard. You've basically finished reading all the high-level books you want. Wuming has always bought a lot of books. At first, it was about the ways of the world and developing feelings. Later, Mayu began to ask for more high-level books, such as anatomy, mechanics, and so on. Wuming didn't refuse Mayu. After all, this was what Mayu wanted, not what Wuming wanted. Mayu looked at Wuming seriously. But I'm also your servant, master. And you're my master, master. It's natural for me to protect you. Wuming picked up Mayu's hand and revealed the hidden command incantation. Also, you're my sister. With this, how can I let you bear all these? Wuming hid the command incantation again, and said to Mayu with a gentle face. Don't worry, I'm here. Mayu's eyes were wet. She once again remembered what Wuming said that day, because I'm here. Moreover, your brother Shiro is not someone to be trifled with. You don't need to think about these things at all. You just need to think about the future. I understand, Brother Wuming, I'll stay in my room. Mayu nodded and said in a choked voice. Wuming smiled with relief. Wargate. As his voice fell, a dark portal appeared in front of Wuming. Wuming waved his hand, and a pendant flew out from Mayu's room. The pendant changed in the air and turned into a pair of golden-green dragon horn headwear, and firmly put on Wuming's head. At this moment, Wuming looked more like a dragon. Shiro, take care of Mayu. Shiro Amiya nodded solemnly. After looking at Mayu, Wuming stepped into the portal. Then, the portal disappeared, leaving Shiro Amiya with a serious and uneasy face and Amiya Mayu with a praying face. At this time, Wuming appeared in a place he had been before. The familiar corridor, the familiar door. Looking at the familiar door in front of him, Wuming knocked on the door. Please come in. Then Wuming opened the door and went straight in. Chapter 108. Wuming opened the door and went in. What he saw was the same as the other world. In the dim room sat a sturdy old man with red eyes and a short white beard. Kithe Zelik Shubein Augustus. Should I call you Hyunryong or Wuming? Zelik said with a smile. Whatever you want. It's my name anyway. I'm here for something, Wuming said indifferently, then sat down and poured himself a cup of tea. Zelik from the other world asked you to come, right? You want to ask about the information of this world, right? Zelik asked. Yes, but can you please answer me? How did the humans in this world end up being destroyed? I promised Zelik to save the world if I could, Wuming said after taking a sip of tea. The disaster in this world has been solved by me and my other self. Solved? Wuming looked at Zelik. because the other me in the other world sensed a disaster that could affect parallel worlds, the other me began to unite with the other me in the other worlds. This world of mine has already been saved by the me in the other worlds through the second method of uniting. Wu-Ming was relieved. After all, Wu-Ming also noticed that the magicians in Winterwood City seemed to have received some kind of notice and were no longer so extreme. Then, could it be because of this that the other party is not in a hurry to hold the Holy Grail War? Wu-Ming thought. I need more information. Seeing that my other self trusts you so much, I'll reluctantly help you. Zelik looked at the dragon horn hair ornament on Wu-Ming's head. After about half an hour, Wu-Ming left the room. Because the Zelik of this world knew that Wu-Ming would come to this world long ago, when Wu-Ming appeared, Zelik found out about Wu-Ming's whereabouts through various means. Because Wu-Ming lived in Winterwood City for 5 years, Zelik also did some research on Winterwood City. Therefore, Zelik knew a lot of information that Wu-Ming did not know. According to Wu-Ming's description, Zelik judged that the other party might be the last person of Ainsworth, named Julian Ainsworth. Although the 3 families of the Yu family suffered heavy casualties in the Holy Grail War, including 2 families including Ainsworth, Ainsworth's last person, Julian Ainsworth, did not want to face this fact. Therefore, even if he knew that humanity had been saved and the world would not be destroyed, Julian still wanted to continue the Holy Grail War. According to Zelik, Julian's wish might still be to save all of humanity. Because as long as one was human, there would be no future without danger. With danger, there would be progress. Zelik knew about the heroic spirits of the 7 class cards and their users. Although those users had long said that the personalities of some people who had died long ago were replaced with machines on the dolls. Other than that, Zelik did not have any other information. After getting the information, Wu-Ming left. Although this world might not be the world that brought danger to other parallel worlds as Zelik said, Wu-Ming did not plan to leave. The main reason was because Mayu had left a deep impression on Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming could not abandon Mayu. There was also Shiro Amiya, the magician who had normal human thinking. Because of Wu-Ming's influence, Shiro Amiya had long abandoned Amiya Kuritsugu's wrong wish and had his own new and correct wish. Wu-Ming opened the portal and returned to the Amiya mansion. As soon as he returned, Wu-Ming discovered that there were people fighting in the courtyard of the Amiya mansion. It was a tentacle-like monster and Shiro Amiya who had used a class card. In one of the rooms of the Amiya mansion, there was an injured purple-haired girl who was about the same age as Shiro Amiya. She was lying unconscious on the ground. At that moment, Wu-Ming more or less knew what had happened. Wu-Ming waved his hand, and an oval lens appeared beside Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming walked toward the purple-haired girl's room while watching Shiro Amiya and the strange tentacle-like monster fight. The tentacle-like monster was 3 meters tall, and its face seemed to be a skull mask. It looked like the monster was made of tentacles. This is assassin? Wu-Ming discovered the monster's true form. That was right. This was the assassin user of the card in the Holy Grail War. He watched as Shiro Amiya held 2 swords in his hands and kept dodging assassins' attack. From time to time, he would throw flying swords and stab assassins back. On the other hand, the tentacle-like monster formed by assassin was completely unaffected. The huge tentacle-like fist kept bombarding the ground. Some of the marble slabs on the ground in the courtyard were smashed away, and soil was splashed everywhere. The originally beautiful Amiya mansion was now a mess. As if the time was right, Shiro Amiya dodged one of Assassin's attacks and jumped onto Assassin's back. He held a pair of black and white swords in his hands and stabbed toward Assassin's back. In an instant, an explosion occurred inside the tentacle-like monster. Then, there was a heart-wrenching scream. Ah! Shiro Amiya jumped to the side of the wall and looked at Assassin who was curled up. He stretched out his hand and a black bow appeared in Shiro Amiya's hand. Then, Wei Gongshiro projected a slender, spiral-shaped sword. This is the Rainbow Sword? Yes, Wu Ming recognized this sword. This was the famous weapon of Fergus Mac Roy in Celtic legend Caladbolg. Because it was shaped like a spiral, it was also called the spiral sword. Because Wu Ming had met Fergus before, he recognized this sword. Although he was a strange guy. At this moment, this rainbow sword was obviously very different from the real rainbow sword. It was too slender, as if it was modified for shooting. Let's call it the fake spiral sword. I see, projection magic, Wu Ming suddenly realized, then said, I'm really worthy of the future you, Shiro. With Wu Ming's eyesight, he could already see the original body of the hero spirit card Shiro Amiya used. If there was no accident, it was the future Shiro Amiya who became a hero spirit after death. Shiro Amiya drew his bow and aimed at the curled-up tentacle ball, but a cherry-colored scarf happened to float by. Shiro Amiya seemed to have thought of something and put down the bow. Wu Ming smiled. Wu Ming once taught Shiro Amiya that once the opponent was determined to be the enemy, don't give the enemy a chance to breathe. Unless Wei Gong Shiro held the pseudo-spiraling sword in a reverse grip, and with the speed of lightning, he fiercely stabbed backwards. A purple-haired man with a skull mask with missing legs and arms appeared behind Shiro Amiya. The fake spiral sword steadily stabbed into his abdomen. Why? The purple-haired man asked in shock. You're the one who said it. Your tentacles can move freely after leaving you. Unless he had absolute confidence in winning. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.